when the mic works. Perfect. Friends, I'm going to invite you to take a seat. I know that people are still gathering. I also know that people online are probably already online, so we're going to start in a timely way. It's a joy to have you all here. Thank you very much for making the journey. As I look around the room, I'm very conscious of the fact that I'm in presence of people who are already accomplished at the art of raising funds. And that's me talking out of a device. So it's like magic. I'm slightly behind myself. Okay, now I'm silenced. So we're just going to pause and offer this moment to God in prayer. Do you know, it was interesting. I was having lunch with the students before I get to the prayer. This is a preamble. And I'm teaching science and religion this year. And so here's a helpful analogy for geological time. So if you think of the history of the Earth, just the Earth, we're not going back to the Big Bang, as a book, it's 450,000 million years. So let's imagine a 450-page book, right? That's the history of the Earth. And life actually doesn't pop up on Earth until page 70. Complex organisms don't arrive until page 130. Dinosaurs are page 340 to 417. Humanoid forms, that includes Neanderthals, coming from the common ancestor of the chimpanzee, they arrive in the last half page of the last page. Humans, modern humanity, arrives in the last sentence of the last page. And all of biblical history, so 3,000 years from the patriarchs to the present, is actually the last letter of the last page of the book. And so we were talking about this as students over lunch, and I said, you know, it's just a reminder of the privilege of prayer. And when you think about what Jesus meant when he talked about sparrows, you know, sparrows were sold for virtually nothing in the temple, you know, and they're infinitely precious. How much more are humans? You're talking about a God that's vast, who really cares about each and every one of us. It's an extraordinary claim at the heart of the Christian gospel. So with that preamble, let us pray. Holy and loving God, we're very conscious of the gift of being in your presence. We thank you for this privilege now. We thank you that you are the creator and sustainer of everything that is, and that you love each and every one of us. We pray for the different communities of faith of which we're a part, and we pray that you might be present in the midst of all those who are part of our community of faith. Loving God, we ask for your presence with us this afternoon as we think about the ministry and vocation of fundraising. We ask all these things in the name of your Son, our Saviour, Jesus Christ. Amen. So, welcome to Virginia Theological Seminary. A very warm welcome to the people who've joined us online. We're delighted you're with us. Thank you for joining us. And special welcome to those who are coping with Helena from those parts of the world. We trust you still have power and you're able to be present with us as you cope with everything that's going on down there. Do you know, there's something puzzling about the fact that this is our first philanthropy symposium. And it's puzzling because in the end, anybody in ministry knows that you've got to be effective at the work of raising resources for program. In the end, everything costs something. And if one doesn't learn the craft of philanthropy, then you end up doing much less by definition. There's a direct correlation between effectiveness in this area and subsequent program. And this is our first Philanthropy Summit, and it was the idea and brainchild of Vice President Linda Dienno. She is the first Vice President of Institutional Advancement, come to that director because that was the title beforehand, who decided that the work of philanthropy requires a graduate degree, and she was the first to go and get a degree in this area. And that reflects her commitment to the importance of this as ministry and the importance of being effective at this art and craft that's so central to ministry. So it is our first Philanthropy Summit. The symposium is intended to be a launch pad, and there will be an opportunity to attend a lifelong learning follow-up forum on October the 22nd, and that will be led by one of today's presenters, the Reverend Dr. Lorenzo Lebrija. The forum will be your opportunity to offer insights and thoughts for future fundraising classes, forums, and learning possibilities at the seminary. So today you're going to hear from 4 excellent presenters about engaging diverse communities in fresh and impactful ways, navigating the latest fundraising technologies and trends, leading your present and future congregations through the changing philanthropic environment, and understanding how all of this is grounded in deep spirituality and mission. I do want to recognize in our midst Mr. Gant Redmond, who's there. Let's just give him a moment as we acknowledge this symposium's made possible by a generous gift from Mr. Gant Redmond in memory of his wife, Fran, who was a complete delight. She died on March the 11th, 2024, at the age of 87. Fran was a true philanthropist and a consummate advocate for various non-profits. She was a good friend of the seminary. She was a member of Christ Church in Old Town. She was always energetic and very, very present whenever you were with her. She mentored those new to the development profession, giving freely of her time and talents. So we're very grateful for that gift. Thank you, Gant. I now invite our Vice President for Institutional Advancement, Vice President Linda Dienno, to introduce our first presenter. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Markham. Have you ever wondered what would happen if, like in an Oprah Winfrey moment, you had the question of if you could have anybody you wanted for breakfast, who would join your table? So when Dr. Dean Markham offered me the opportunity to think a little bit about a symposium, I thought of the people I would love to have, and they are here today. Rob Garris, Anna Barber, Alice Ferris, and Lorenzo Lebrija. So I'm really thrilled. I know each of them. I've learned from each of them as I was going through my master's degree program and as I've done my work here at the seminary, and I'm just excited for what is going to happen today and after today. So our first presenter is Rob Garris. He's the Executive Director of the Trinity Leadership Fellows Program and Managing Director of Leadership Development Initiative on the Philanthropies team at Trinity Church, Wall Street in New York. That usually gets a ooh. Rob builds programs to develop new leaders who create positive change at community, national, and global levels. And these programs support the creation of educational programming that develops the leadership capacities of people of faith, empowering them to better serve their communities and congregations. He has extensive background. He's done innovative international work and research programs at universities and foundations for more than 20 years, including working for the Schwarzman Scholars, a leadership development program in China, the Rockefeller Foundation, Columbia University, and Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. Rob's work is really to work with people to get them to know and look at assumptions, to stay true to their values, and focus on creating positive change in the communities they serve. Rob received his Ph.D. in European history from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, where he specialized in immigration and urban policy. And with that, I give you Rob.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. You just heard that I'm a historian by training, but I promise that I'm not going to take you back to ancient Mesopotamia as we talk about the origins of philanthropy. But my historian is going to come out a little bit in this presentation. But what I really want to do is not just march you through the history of foundations and how they emerged in the United States, but to help those of you who are thinking about fundraising better understand how foundations develop their strategy and in particular engage with local communities. Because I think a lot of us are working in church spaces, at churches or seminaries, and the work that we do is very locally grounded, and therefore it's important and helpful, I hope, to understand how foundations go about engaging in those local spaces. I want to start off my remarks about the origins of strategic philanthropy and philanthropic strategy with a couple of very serious-looking men up on the screen, Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller. They, in many ways, can be credited with the emergence of institutions that use giving as a way to create change in the world around them. Andrew Carnegie wrote The Gospel of Wealth in 1889, and in that made an argument that it was the obligation of people who had accumulated wealth and created harm through their accumulation of wealth to use that to start addressing some of the challenges, some of the problems that they had created. It was an interesting sense in some parts of the book about rebuilding relationships that had been ruptured through the accumulation of wealth. A while after he wrote The Gospel of Wealth in 1905, he created the Carnegie Foundation, which still exists as a philanthropic institution today. Not long after that, John D. Rockefeller also decided that he was going to move into a similar space. He, in fact, throughout his life, he was a devout Baptist, had always very carefully given 10% of his wealth to the church. But in the early part of the 20th century, and then by 1911 formalized it institutionally, decided that he wanted to create a foundation that would improve the well-being of mankind around the world, was what he said he wanted his foundation to do over time. And I mentioned that very grand statement as a way of signaling that these two philanthropists really thought about their work, their institutions and their work, as addressing global level, societal level issues. They worked at local levels. Carnegie is very well known for having created a series of libraries around the country. He was very dedicated to education. So work is conceived on a global level and a societal level, but often implemented at a local level. And I'll come back to that in a moment. But in its earliest stages in this country as a formal institution, philanthropy was very often conceived of at a very high level addressing societal and global issues. Not long after Carnegie and Rockefeller created their foundations, though, another philanthropist, Frederick Goff, who was the president of the Cleveland Trust, started thinking about how to address local challenges in the immediate space around his institution, around the Cleveland Trust, and created in 1914 the Cleveland Foundation. It was, at the time and still is, focused on addressing problems in Cleveland. And this is a very different way of working because the philanthropists are living alongside in the same city with the people and the challenges that they're looking to address. This also established an interesting structure for community foundations in that in creating this one institution, he brought together a number of local funds with different purposes and bundled them into one institution. So each of those funds could operate with its own goal of health or education, but managed in one institution. And that's ultimately important to know when you're working with many kinds of community foundations, because often they're a conglomeration of a lot of different interests and a lot of different goals connected to each other because of the locality and the place, but still with very well-defined individual and separate purposes. The origins of the Community Foundation in 1914 then expanded, proliferated really rapidly. By the 1920s, in fact, all across the country, up until the Great Depression, which obviously put a hold on a lot of this kind of development. But now, depending on how you count, there are more than 900 community foundations in the United States. This is data from the Council on Foundations. Those are accredited foundations that go through a formal accreditation process. The number is actually higher than that, but these are the ones that the Council on Foundation recognizes. organizes. And you can see that there's a much greater concentration in the Northeast and the Midwest, but they are fairly well spread around the United States. To give you a little bit of a sense of the difference in scale between private foundations, the sorts of things that people like Carnegie and Rockefeller created, and community foundations, just in terms of the amount of giving that they do, you can see that private foundations are moving a lot more money than community foundations are. But the community foundations, as you'll hear later in my remarks, are in many ways a much better touch point for the kinds of institutions that many of us work with, churches that are doing local kind of service provision and are looking for funding for that kind of service provision. 17% of all giving in the United States is from these kinds of foundations that you see on this chart. And even though that's where my remarks are focused today, and I hope some of the other speakers will be addressing what I'm about to comment on, 70% of the giving in the United States is still from individual donors directly to a nonprofit organization. So I'm speaking about my world. I've worked in the foundation world since 2009. But that process of understanding what motivates individuals to give and they're giving directly to a nonprofit organization is still a really important part of the picture. So keep that in mind as I offer you advice about how to engage with foundations. They're just 17% of all the giving in the United States. That's expected to increase over time. The giving pledge that Warren Buffett and Bill Gates have advocated has created a lot of movement in this direction with wealthy people like Carnegie and Rockefeller more than 100 years ago, creating their own foundations, very often with very high-level global or societal goals, but many of those new foundations are working at a local level. The Silicon Valley Foundation out in the West Coast that brings together a lot of tech donors is a good example of new and innovative giving that's focused on a locality, but being driven by a lot of this new giving that's driven by the Gates and Buffett giving pledge. What I want to share with you here is data from a 2021 report at the Council on Foundations about the areas where existing foundations are focusing. And I want to make a couple of comments about this. You can see, I won't read it out loud, you can see what that distribution is. Can I just see a show of hands? Can you actually read the chart okay? Okay, great. That's really good to know. I don't want to repeat this data, but really to make the point that a lot of foundations, through their strategy making, have already decided where they're focusing their giving in a particular period of time. This changes. It's one of the things to know about working with foundations, in particular as new presidents come on board or as board membership cycles over time. So these things aren't necessarily locked in perpetuity. The Rockefeller Foundation, where I worked, has changed its focus over time, and other foundations very often do. But in the moment, when you're approaching a foundation, it's very important to know where their strategy is focused. You don't want to waste your time, your very valuable time in fundraising, barking up the wrong tree. And I would say that these are very aggregate level descriptions of where foundations are focusing their giving right now. You need to drill down much tighter than that, because education can mean a lot of different things to different people. Some foundations may be focused on first-generation access to higher education. Other foundations might be focused on primary education and literacy. So education encompasses a lot of things, and you could just go down the list of health, arts, and culture. And all I would say is that both through your research on the foundation's website, but even better through conversation with the foundation staff, understand what's the fine-grained element of that foundation's strategy, and look for alignment between what they're doing and what you do. And if you don't see that alignment, then just be comfortable moving on. But keep your eye on the foundation, because they do change, and that focus may change over time. The next slide that I want to share with you is not what they give for, meaning the subject area, but the kinds of activities that foundations are open to supporting. And program development is a very well-known kind of interaction between nonprofit organizations or churches and foundations. They're giving you funding to develop or expand a new program, and that's the most common statistically here, and I think it's the most common way that a lot of us engage with foundations. But the second line, general support, is something I want to pause and comment on because that's grown enormously in recent years. And I want to give a shout out to someone who I know and care about a great deal, Darren Walker at the Ford Foundation, because he really led a lot of the large foundations in opening up to providing general support to their partners, to not just essentially giving grant money in a contractual way for a particular project, but supporting the underlying infrastructure that makes for a healthy civil society. So that at the point that this data was collected in 2021, it was at 20%. I wouldn't be surprised if it continues to grow even larger because a number of donors are recognizing that you have to have a healthy ecosystem in order to be able to launch projects. So you can't do one without the other. And I think that's a very good development in the foundation and giving space. I'm going to spend a lot of time here because I'm moving now into an area that I care a lot about. I've been talking about foundations very much in the abstract, but I think what we care about is what does it actually look like on the ground in a community? How do foundations engage with communities? Let me start a little bit by commenting on where foundations get their funding, because that very often shapes where and how they engage. Community foundations in particular, most commonly will collect their funding through donations from that community. So they're collecting funds and then distributing those funds in the same community. In some cases, it's a single family or donor who created the community foundation, and that single family or donor therefore has great influence over where the focus of that giving is. What's the issue, what's the topic, and that makes it a little bit harder to shift. There are donor-advised funds, which are pools of multiple donors who are, I think, quite wisely bringing their money together for greater impact. And that's a more democratic process where multiple people are commenting on what the strategy and the focus is, and it also therefore can evolve and change over time. Last but not least, corporations are often very active in doing local giving. Many corporations will have some sort of philanthropic wing to their work, and very often will focus that giving on their place, the headquarters of the corporation or where the corporation does a lot of its work. The ways that community foundations in particular, but sometimes often larger foundations, have impact is first and foremost through giving. I think that's how a lot of us think about engaging with foundations. It's that transfer of funding. But many of them are also operating foundations, and I'll give some examples of these in just a moment, where they're running programs directly themselves and having their impact in communities through direct operating. And then a few community foundations are a mix of the two. They're both giving, grant making, and doing direct operating to address social issues in their communities. All of this is done through a lot of different governance models, and the governance models for foundations are, I think, very helpful for you to understand because they give you a signal of how likely you are to have influence over that strategy and the focus of the foundation. Some foundations, the Rockefeller Foundation being an example of this, was founded many years ago by a single donor, built a board. That donor believed very much in the power of science to address human needs, and that still is very much in the DNA of the Rockefeller Foundation. So obviously the presidents of the Rockefeller Foundation have changed frequently over the last century plus. The board has changed enormously over the last century plus, but that original founding perspective that science and technology can address human needs still shapes that institution. I think that single donor model where there's a board that makes the decisions really locks in perspectives. And you can imagine that institutions like the Gates Foundation, which also has a very science and technology focus, probably will keep that for a very long time. Other governance models, and these are newer, are much more democratic, and in particular for a community foundation, I think very important. And those are models where either the grantees of the institution are at some point invited to engage in strategy or even in grant making itself, or where community members, people who live in the community, not executives from other corporations, but everyday members of the community, are invited in some sort of advisory capacity, in a grant-making capacity or given seats on the board. So there's a big range in the level of direct engagement between the foundation, its governance, its decision-making, and the communities where these foundations work. And I think it's, as you consider approaching a foundation to pitch your project, in particular a local project, understanding that governance model is very helpful. Partly in the moment, but also in thinking about not only asking about a grant, but can you engage somehow in shaping that foundation's longer-term vision for the work that it does. Let me bring this all down to the ground with just a few examples. And in this part of it, we could go on forever talking about really wonderful examples, but I'm going to speak to the ones that I have some familiarity with. And when we get to Q&A, I would really invite you, because there's a lot of knowledge and talent in the room, to share other interesting and exciting examples of these models or of other models that you might know of. The Rockefeller Foundation, as I mentioned, is a private foundation thinking, strategizing, and working on a global level, but it gets its work done in specific places in very local ways. And a project that Rockefeller ran essentially in the 2010s, 2013 to 2019, called 100 Resilient Cities, is an example of that. So again, Rockefeller thinks on a global level. It was very interested in the impacts of climate change and how to help humanity adapt to the impacts of climate change. Most people live in cities, so the focus became cities. And then the question became, how can we help 100 cities around the world get ready for the impacts of climate change? And 100 Resilient Cities came out of that. So that was a strategy that was developed in consultation with a lot of experts in urban planning, in climate change, in a headquarters in New York City. And then the foundation went looking for partners to help implement that strategy. And what I love about this is, in that phase of transitioning to working with local partners, it remained very open to what the local needs of individual cities were in adapting to climate change. And as that project rolled out, and it was a fairly large project, $61 million over that 6-year span that we're describing. I'm sorry, $160 million over that span that we're describing. It developed infrastructure in some cities to deal with rainwater. It developed new energy sources to help people be more resilient as there were power outages. It even went to the point of dealing with social issues so that the society was more resilient to shocks. Very often, and I won't go, ask me later if you're curious, about New York City during Sandy and what we learned in New York City about the importance of social networks to help a city survive the shocks of climate change. So the foundation, even though it was functioning at that global level and setting its strategy from a center, when it went to implement that, really worked with and listened to local partners about their needs. So that's an interesting blend of a centralized strategy setting, but a very adaptable and localized implementation. The H.E. Butt Foundation is, I would describe it as a community foundation, but it's an interesting hybrid, supported by a family, driven by their Christian values to do youth-oriented programming and community-oriented programming in and around San Antonio is the quick and easy way to describe where they work. And if someone is close to the H.E. Butt Foundation, I'm sorry if I'm going through things too quickly. This foundation is from the community, embedded in the community, deeply committed to the community. It sets its strategy through the family and through values that are driven by their Christian faith, but the implementation and the work is done in a very face-to-face way with the community. So when they look to strengthen the community, they're not thinking about that in a vacuum, but in conversation and listening to the community, focusing on health, on education, on families as their way of strengthening communities in San Antonio. Some of that is through grant making. A lot of that is through direct operating of programming for families, for children, youth retreats, those sorts of things. And then the last example, but certainly not the least, is the one that I'm most familiar with at this point in my life, and that's Trinity Church. Trinity is not a foundation, it's a church, but it's an unusual church that has, through a very fortunate gift from Queen Anne in 1703, enormous assets which we deploy for charitable purposes in New York City and around the world. We also operate in that blended model. We do direct service provision in New York City, and I'll say more about that in a moment. And we also do grant making to help others carry out the things that we care about, both in New York City and around the world. The areas where we do grant making are in racial justice and housing and homelessness in New York City, and we partner really closely with and listen to the nonprofit organizations in the city who are doing this work on the front lines as we think about how to adapt and adjust our strategy year to year. So we've decided those are the areas we're going to work on in New York City, but how we go about doing that is deeply informed by constant conversation with our partners around the city and by our presence in the city. Two other areas where we do grant making are leadership development and mission real estate. And those are both focused on the church, the Episcopal Church and the Anglican Communion. And what we're doing there again is, and we see that as our community. That's not a geographic community, but it absolutely is our community. And we are working with our partners in the Episcopal Church and the Anglican Communion to strengthen leaders for the church who are more effective at serving their congregations and their communities. This link between church and community is a very important part of the way that we think of ourselves and also our philanthropy. So we are, through grant making and through the Trinity Leadership Fellows, helping to create a new generation of lay and ordained leaders for the church who see that connection between church and community as essential to ministry. And last but not least, mission real estate helps other churches and dioceses tap into the value of their real estate holdings to fund ministry in their neighborhoods and in their communities. So that's our grant-making profile. But I want to say a few words about our direct service provision in New York City, because that's what we see on a regular basis. You know, that's what really touches your heart as you come and go from our building. Trinity, when we constructed our office building right next to the church, engaged in conversation with our neighbors about what they needed from a new building in the neighborhood. And that conversation ended up focusing very much on two New York City public high schools that are on the same block as we are. Those high schools, like almost everything in New York City, are strapped for space. So they really had limited what they had to classrooms to teach the basics and did not have the space to offer sports activities for their students, for high school students, and had insufficient space, let me say, for arts programming, for after-school programming. So Trinity, in this very New York City-looking glass skyscraper, set aside 3 floors that we've dedicated to the use of those public high schools. And when school is in session every afternoon at 3 o'clock, Trinity fills up with 700 high school students attending sports activities, arts, dance, music, college test prep. They get meals. They have sort of full service provision of an after-school program for those kids. And it just makes our building into a very different place. You know, it's our way of really connecting with the community that's literally all around us. In the same spaces in this office building, twice a week, Trinity runs a no-cost pantry called the Compassion Market that invites anyone in the city who has need to come in and get provisions for their kitchen and for their families. The church on site and in other sites around the city does meal provision, 2 million meals a year provided by Trinity Church Wall Street and our partners in those other sites. I didn't mention we have 1,000 visitors served over the course of the year in that pantry that I mentioned, and 2 million meals a year, I mentioned that. The other thing that I want to add about this service provision is that it is such an important part of the way that we see ourselves, our mission, our vision for what a church should be doing in its neighborhood and how it connects to its community. When we ran out of space in this building, which just opened in 2019, but the demand in the city is so great, we have now just very recently partnered with a primary school in the Lower East Side in New York City that had unused space, so that we were able to expand the pantry to another part of Lower Manhattan, English as a second language classes, both in our building and in this place in another location in Lower Manhattan, meal service. So constrained by the bricks and mortar, or the glass and steel of our building, we found another partner who had extra space and were able to almost double that capacity to serve our neighborhood in Lower Manhattan. It's an important part of the way that we think about who we are and how we engage in the city. It's not just about giving money, it's about engaging with people and about listening to them. And I'll wrap up with my remarks on that point of listening. Trinity certainly does this, and I think many community foundations do this in different ways with different governance structures. But there have been two moments in my short time, well, 5 years. I don't know if you think that's a short time to work in one place. I feel like it's a short time. In my 5 years at Trinity, there have been two moments where Trinity listened and pivoted really quickly. We think about strategy, we plan, we put together 5-year and 10-year plans about what we want to do. But when the pandemic hit the city, it became really clear from all of our partners really, really fast how hard that was going to hit them. And Trinity shifted budgets rapidly and put out millions of dollars in emergency grants to our partners in New York City and around the world to help them survive the immediate strain of the pandemic. Turned around faster than I've ever, in working at Columbia, Rockefeller, or Trinity, a pivot that was faster than anything I've ever seen any board and governance structure able to do. And then we've lived through that again very recently in a way that was in many ways more visible and tangible. I'm sure many of you have read about the asylum seekers dynamics in New York City, where some states in the United States have been sending asylum seekers to cities around the country. New York City has received tens of thousands of asylum seekers in a very short period of time, and that's part of what put such a strain on our direct service provision. And the vestry at Trinity, in fact, the city repurposed a Holiday Inn that's right across the street from our office building into one of the emergency shelters for the newly arrived New Yorkers is our phrase for these folks. And that moment where suddenly there were thousands of more people in our neighborhood in desperate need of support is what drove that rapid expansion of all of those direct service provision programs that I talked about. Again, a board, the vestry, I say board, but it's the vestry of our church that pivoted, rebudgeted, saw the need as we listened to people showing up for food and items from the pantry. We heard that some folks didn't have documentation of the fact that they were married. The church started doing weddings for people so that they could get a marriage certificate. And just listening to people about what they need, understanding that people were traveling the distance from the Lower East Side to come to us was part of our decision to set up a new site in the Lower East Side. All of these things are about meeting people face to face, listening to their needs, and being willing to pivot away from a pre-established strategy to serve the needs of people. So I will wrap up with that and open it up for any questions that you might have, and also to observations from your own experience about working with big private foundations, community foundations, or other observations you want to make. But thank you very much. Yes. Hi. I think that's for all the folks online.
Hello?
Yeah.
Hi. So I had a quick question about just discovering foundations that do support faith-based work. Like how do you identify which foundations in your community or globally will support faith-based work? Are there any resources that you like to use to find those?
Yeah, I don't know how many people in the room are familiar with candid.org, a website. They are a great resource for doing research on foundations. So that would be my starting point. And there are different levels of access. There's free access, and then there's paid access that lets you drill down deeper into what people are doing. But when I'm curious on any topic, what foundations are working in which field, that's where I would start. But I will just reiterate that the power of conversation is essential. Talking to people who have received grants from foundations in the area that you want to, and you know what it's like to sort of talk to the next person. I'd never end a conversation without asking someone, who else do you think I should talk to, as a way of just getting that domino effect. Yeah, please.
Marshall again, I'm a consultant.
Hi, Marshall.
Micro. So you mentioned towards the end of talking about Trinity's work about the role of the vestry. Tell us how Trinity, again, your structure is so large because you have the endowment, but how do you involve the parish? How do you keep the parish and the vestry connected to what you're doing so that by extension, when they do a stewardship campaign and if any of those resources then go into, what does that communication flow look like?
Yeah, so the vestry, I forget the exact percentage, but well more than half of the vestry members at Trinity are from the congregation at Trinity. So there's a direct line there. The Congregational Council, which is all congregation members, are also directly involved in a lot of these conversations. So there are many different pathways and structures for that engagement. And the members of the philanthropy team meet with these different bodies on a regular basis. So there's regular conversation about the priorities. And the congregation, in addition to all of the programming that I described here, the congregation also have many hands-on ways that they're doing prison ministry in the city and any other sorts of ministries so that they're involved in a personal and direct way in this kind of work. Sure.
Seats on the board, but you didn't expound upon it at all. Are there any guidance for us when we're talking with potential donors, particularly at the community foundation or foundation in general level, about seats on board? I am particularly sensitive to sort of that pro quo kind of topic.
Right. So I think, sitting on a board is an incredibly valuable experience, in terms of your ability not only to shape the direction of an institution, but to learn. I find it an incredibly informative learning experience to serve on a board. But it's going to exclude your ability to actually be a grant recipient from the organization in that moment. We are very careful, and I can't make a blanket statement on this front, but every foundation I've ever known had some sort of barrier to board members or their organizations benefiting from grants from the institution in that moment. So it's a trade-off. You're shaping vision, strategy, focus areas, but not benefiting for your organization in that moment. And then joining a board like that is going to depend on patient relationship building. It's going to come from a long, deep connection rather than a brief interaction.
Hi there. I just wanted to follow up on one of the questions on faith-based organizations. My limited experience with foundations is a large majority of them specifically prohibit faith-based, and especially, and I've had some experience where we were a faith-based organization, but we're doing, things with homelessness and stuff like that you could, find a connection. But especially at a church level, that seems to be almost like a no-go. In those cases, is it just better to just kind of scratch those off the list and focus on the ones that are, or is there any merit in investing any kind of time in that?
I would say that a number of foundations that I'm aware of recognize the power of religious institutions to engage in community at a very deep and meaningful way. One of my earliest lessons, I'm going to go way off on a tangent if you don't mind. When I was working at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, which has one of the strongest international development programs in this country, the director of that program really raised my awareness about the fact that a lot of international development work, program implementation on the ground, is done through religious institutions. So she was very aware of it. A lot of those agencies are very aware of it, and therefore a lot of donors who support that kind of work are aware of and comfortable with it. Now, what that means about your community and the foundations that are working in your community, it won't necessarily translate, but that symbiotic relationship comes out of the fact that the church institutions have the relationships and the knowledge and the neighborhood awareness that's needed for effective service provision. And that, I think, is the point of the conversation. And if you're able to engage in a conversation with a program officer and talk to them about the value that you bring in terms of your ability to do deep engagement with the community, I think that can be an opening point for a conversation. But if they have an institutional high-level policy that says no, I wouldn't spend the time. Yes, there in the back.
Not a question, but a comment from online, from Lori Gunther-Reeser, who says that she so appreciates the stories about Trinity Wall Street welcoming newly arrived New Yorkers.
Thank you.
I guess to jump off of that comment, the beautiful comment, I'm thinking of community listening, and what are some strategies that you may have gained in helping foundations to listen well and really honor the voice of those partners that are maybe on the ground level?
The insight that I have on that is patience and being willing to dedicate time. All of us are in such a hurry. And I don't want to pretend like foundations are special on that front, but being willing to create environments where people can share openly and where you take the time not to just listen once, but to listen repeatedly so that you're building trust is a critical part of it. Trinity's been working in racial justice and housing and homelessness in New York City for years. We didn't just plunge right into that. And the ability of those partners to speak openly to us about what direction we need to be going is based on years of conversation, years of convening in our building, years of us meeting in their spaces. That's where that kind of connection and then learning comes from. But the connection, the patience, the FaceTime with people comes long before the actual learning. Some of the other examples that I shared about our engagement with newly arrived New Yorkers was about face-to-face engagement in more of an emergency situation where there wasn't a long-established relationship, and we're just fortunate that a number of staff members at Trinity are bilingual and we're able to just engage in casual conversation rather than be transactional in the meal provision or in the pantry. So that linguistic capacity to engage in friendly, personal conversation is what opened up those learning opportunities for us, and every institution may not have that ability. In fact, we're unusual, as an institution that does both grant making and direct service provision. It's very often through that direct service provision that we're hearing and then learning and pivoting. So our situation is unusual. It's not necessarily going to work for every organization, but whatever the structure is, whatever the engagement is, you have to be willing to dedicate the time in the moment, and the time meaning over a span, so that you build trust and relationship. It's all grounded in relationship. Great, thank you.
I always say I don't want to follow Ian Markham. I'm going to add Rob Garris to the list. Thank you so much. What a privilege and a pleasure to get that information. And a reminder that this is being recorded. You will get the recordings afterwards, and Lorenzo Lebrija is actually going to be preparing it so that you can even look at various segments that you want to. So thank you, Lorenzo, for doing that. So I was at a conference, 7 or 8 years ago, and learning of different things about fundraising and diversity, and people kept telling me, well, you really need to meet Anna Barber, you really need to meet Anna Barber, you really need to meet Anna Barber. So I went to the elevator, punched the key to go up, thinking, I wonder how I'll meet Anna. The door opened, and she stood there, a name tag on it. Oh, Anna Barber! I'm amazed she didn't just run from me, but she didn't. Anna Barber is the president of Barber and Associates. She was the senior gift officer for the Smithsonian Institution and the National Museum of American History and Culture. She was, I call her, the chief fundraising architect. They surpassed $270 million raising money for that endeavor. The thing I like the best, though, is that Anna really focused on people that could give gifts of at least $1 million. And I think you got 25 of those, 22 of those. And by the way, she organized and planned a dinner at Denzel and Paulette Washington's house that was $1 million a plate, I believe. So Anna knows something about fundraising. She also worked frontline fundraising, big-time college athletics for Michigan State University when she raised $100 million in a capital campaign. I can tell already Ian is thinking that I need to go ahead and retire so he can bring some of these other people in here. Anna earned a Juris Doctorate Intellectual Property from Arizona State University, a bachelor degree science in political science from Howard University, and she's an avid traveler and scuba diver. I'm so glad that you're with us today, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you so much, Linda. And thank you to the Virginia Theological Seminary for hosting this Philanthropy Symposium today. I love to see everyone in the audience and everyone online. Welcome, welcome. I'm happy to be here. So I just want to get a sense of who's in the room before I get started, and then I'll kind of orient you to what I'm going to be talking about. So how many in the room are senior leaders at their respective nonprofits, at a nonprofit? Okay, so almost half here. How many people in the room are development professionals? Okay, so a good number. How many in the room are board members? Okay, and there's some overlap, I think, there between positions. And how many in here are just here to learn a little bit more about philanthropy and fundraising? Okay, well, it's good to have everyone here. So I'm here today to really talk about and ask, are you ready to fundraise? And really help the audience understand what it requires to plan to be able to fundraise. So there's a long series of exercises that go into the preparation before you actually get out into the field and do the fundraising. And my job generally is to help organizations get ready so that when you have the ability to have a conversation with any funder, despite the size, you are well prepared to have that conversation. You have an understanding of what it is you want to articulate from a long-term strategic perspective. You know what priorities and initiatives you do well, what you want to make investments in, how much you need to raise. So today's conversation is really about the preparation process and what your organizations, despite what your position is within your organizations, what your organizations should be going through to get prepared to go through this process. So Linda did a fantastic job of introducing me, and I appreciate it greatly. This is just kind of an overview of my background. I have owned and operated Barber & Associates, which is a boutique fundraising consulting firm here in Washington, D.C. for the last 7.5 years. I have also co-founded an online company that helps small nonprofits develop their fundraising prowess. So we work both full service and with small organizations. We really focus in on developing cases for support and ensuring that organizations understand what needs to go into a case for support so that they can be very, very confident in having conversations with funders. And I have taken a lot of the lessons learned from my experience both at the Smithsonian with the National Museum of African American History and Culture, as well as my role in the Central Office of Advancement, where we represented all 19 museums and 9 research centers at the Smithsonian, and from college athletics. And I know that's maybe a non-traditional field for many people in this room, but college athletics is not a fluke. They don't raise money like that just because. They have a lot of infrastructure. And so a lot of the lessons that I learned and deployed both as a fundraiser and as a consultant are taken directly from the college athletics model. And I think that a lot of organizations, my philosophy is we should start to adopt what college athletics does and really think about the assets that we have within our own institutions that we can offer a community or a donor base that's interested and aligned with the work that we do. So this is the process to get there, or my process to get there. So the first piece of it is really all about strategic thinking, right? First, let's talk a little bit about what people think is the classic definition of fundraising. So how many in this room think that this feels about right for the classic definition of what fundraising is? Seeking the seeking of financial support for a charity, cause, or other enterprise. Yeah? Okay. Maybe yes, no? So that's what we see in Webster's dictionary. But from my perspective, fundraising is much more about the work of the organization. It's about what the organization wants to do for society, what the organization is doing to make transformative change, what it wants to do in the future, how many people are served. So when you go into a conversation, you're not thinking about, well, oh my gosh, I have to ask this person for money. It's not about the money. It's about the actual work and how you articulate and communicate that work in a clear, concise, and compelling way. Because it's the work that speaks volumes. It's not about the dollar amount. If you can communicate the work of your organization in a way that you don't even have to ask at the end, that's an ideal situation. And so we want to put as many organizations in the position to be able to fundraise in that capacity. So I also like to help organizations kind of shift a little bit from a scarcity mindset, right? So how many in this room have a hard time thinking really big about where you think your organization can go? And not just from a fundraising perspective, there are a few hands here, not just from a fundraising perspective, but like we are running an organization, there are all of these problems that we want to solve and all these challenges we want to address, but there are restraints in thinking about, well, how are we going to actually do that? How are we going to get there? How many people feel that sometimes? So there's a few hands. I think that's a much more common thought than not, right? And that's coming from a scarcity mindset. But when you're thinking about planning for fundraising success, you can't start with a scarcity mindset. You really have to think from an abundance mindset and believe that there is all that you need is out there to get you where you and your organization need to go. Because if you start with a scarcity mindset, you think far too small. You don't have the ability to dream, and you ask for too little, right? So we want to shift from that scarcity mindset into an abundance mindset, right? We want to think big about what the future is, right? We want to believe that we have the ability to address challenges and issues within our society and within our communities and within our congregations or our constituents. But the leader of an organization, whether you're an executive director, whether you are a board member, whether you're a development professional, the leaders of organizations must dream bigger than where they are now and how much they are asking for. Because you can't make transformative change thinking about where you are right now and nowhere beyond where you are right now. We have to think about the future. Where do we want to go? What do we want to do? How do we want to see society be different in the future because of our work? So that's more of an abundance mindset. And there's lots of activities to take you guys through scarcity to an abundance mindset, but I'm not going to go there today. But I do want you to really think about the possibilities and allow yourself to envision how you see society in a perfect world, right? And allow yourself to sit there and stay there for a while, because eventually you're going to want to be able to communicate that aspirational vision. So we talked a little bit about philanthropy in the United States. So we always go to Giving USA. Unfortunately, these are still numbers from 2022. The numbers haven't changed dramatically since 2022, but the 2023 numbers have come out. So in 2022, almost $500 billion was given away philanthropically in this country. That's a lot more money than I think a lot of people believe is coming from philanthropic sources. Where did this generosity come from? Again, from Giving USA, where individuals gave 71%. So roughly, individuals gave a majority of the money in that philanthropic landscape. About 21% came from foundations, and then about 6% came from corporations. So do these percentages align with what you thought where philanthropy was coming from? Okay. A lot of the people that I speak with believe that most of the philanthropy comes from corporations and foundations, and don't even look to individual donors as a potential option. And my entire career has only been working with individual donors. I've never worked on the institutional side of things. So thinking about making sure you're incorporating individual donors into your portfolios. Where did the charitable dollars go? We talked a little bit about that in our previous presentation, but this gives a breakdown of how philanthropy was allocated across the country. And as you can see, I mean, this is super appropriate for this audience. Look at what's number one, right? That resonates with many of the organizations that are sitting in this audience today. A lot, because historically, religious entities have had very successful campaigns to get their congregations, to get their communities, to support their organizations. And so religious philanthropy is at the top of the list. And it goes down to human services, education, foundations, as we talked about earlier, health, public society benefit, international affairs. If you look at this list, how many different categories does the work you do fall into? Probably more than just one. And so thinking about the different sectors that you can access when it comes to philanthropy. So now that we've covered the foundation and we've now gone to an abundance mindset, let's start getting prepared for our organization's fundraising success. The first two big pieces is really making sure that you have an aspirational vision for where you want to go and a very clear and concise mission. So they're separate. They're kind of distinct and different in nature. So aspirational vision is really an idea of where you want your organization to go, what kind of impact you'd like to have over a long period of time, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. We're looking down the road. Aspirational vision is not, what do I want to do next year? What do I want to do in 2 years? But we've got to start to think from that abundance mindset. 10, 15, 20 years is a long time. You can accomplish a lot if you set big goals for yourself, if you set big vision for yourself. So questions to consider when thinking about aspirational vision. What is the problem or challenge you're seeking to solve on a grand scale? What solution can your organization play in solving that challenge? And then third, if your organization is able to accomplish those long-term goals and objectives, what do you think you can actually achieve? How will society be different? So these are the questions that you should be grappling with as an organization, within your boards. Have conversations about these things, because setting this aspirational vision is critically important to making transformational change. So as everyone has mentioned, Linda's mentioned, I worked for the National Museum of African American History and Culture for 8.5 years before the museum opened, right? So I started in 2009 at the Smithsonian. I actually left college athletics, did not know the National Museum of African American History and Culture was coming online, and realized I had an opportunity of a lifetime to work on behalf of a project that was so instrumental and transformative for this country. But when I started in 2009, I didn't know the museum was happening, and neither did the rest of the country. We had no site location, we had no architect, we had no curators, we had very little collections, we had a very small staff, but we had Lonnie Bunch, who was the founding director. And Lonnie Bunch had a big, bold, aspirational vision for where that institution would go. He really wanted the museum to tell a more complete American story, not an African American story, an American story from an African American lens. And you can interpret that vision in many different ways. right? You can interpret that vision as, you know, this country had not fully embraced the full story of what makes up America. And here is an opportunity for this institution to fill that void and fill that gap, right? Or you could look at it from an internal perspective, from a Smithsonian perspective. The Smithsonian at that time really did not have a diverse narrative or diverse staff or diverse leadership, right? There hadn't been much in the way of diverse exhibitions. And so here's an opportunity for a museum to begin to collect, to begin to bring in diverse communities, staff, leadership, donors, everything, to help diversify our nation's institution, right? So you can interpret this big, bold, aspirational vision in multiple different ways, but this vision was critically important at the beginning when we had nothing else, to go out and talk to donors that had no affiliation whatsoever with the Smithsonian and begin to build support and credibility for this institution coming online. I remember back in like 2010, they said, well, we want you to go to California. And I was like, okay. And start raising money in California. And I was like, okay, so who do I start with? Where are the prospects? We don't have anybody. And the Smithsonian really didn't have a diverse donor base either. So I tried to start with some of the Smithsonian donors. Didn't produce much fruit, some of them really did step up. Sacco Fisher, who was the chair of the Smithsonian's Board of Regents, actually allowed us or asked Ann and Gordon Getty to host a party at their home in San Francisco for 45 early in the project. So there was some leadership at the Smithsonian that stood up for this project, but otherwise we had no donors. So this vision, we had to sell this vision to people of what this institution would mean for this country, what it would mean for the Smithsonian, what it would mean for the future of our society. And so I encourage each of you to really think about where you want to take your institutions, where you want to take your organizations, because this vision will drive everything else, okay? Mission statement, most of us have them. Just make sure, my objective here is to ensure that each mission, all of your missions, are clear and concise, and that they state your organization's strategic decisions, program development, resource allocation, and overall direction. You want that to be communicated in what your mission is. But don't overthink it. There's a lot of other planning to do. But here are some examples of some mission statements. So the Smithsonian's was really big. It was very difficult to articulate what the Smithsonian actually did as an organization, but we figured it out. But it was the increase in diffusion of knowledge. It's very short. It's memorable, though. People can remember this mission. The increase in diffusion of knowledge. Is that how you think about the Smithsonian? I mean, when you actually start thinking about it. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Human Rights Watch, defending the rights of people worldwide. That's pretty clear. It's pretty concise. AARP, to enhance the quality of life for all of us as we age. These mission statements make sense for these organizations, right? And so it's helpful for you to start to think about your mission statement in a very clear and concise way so that your donor audience, your constituents, can remember what it is that you do. You want them to remember where you want to go and what it is you are actually doing. So not making it overly complicated, 5 sentences, big words. Make it shorter. But with all of this, I just want you to remember that it's your solutions plus donor funds that equate to social change. Donors are not going to go out and do the work that you're doing. They're looking for organizations to support to do this work. You are the ones that they're looking to fund, but you've got to be very clear about where you want to go and what you're currently doing, and then there's a few more things that we're going to plan for next. But life is like a garden. You reap what you sow. If you don't put the work in at the beginning, it becomes very difficult to actually grow anything. So we want you to go through the process of growing, planting and growing. So we're going to go into the strategic planning process really quickly. And I know there's a lot here, okay? But these are the basic foundational elements. Because from a fundraiser's perspective, these are the things that I need to be able to be effective on behalf of an organization, an effective fundraiser on behalf of an organization. So strategic planning for fundraising. So it's slightly different from strategic planning, but I've just thrown this in here because a lot of organizations that we worked with hadn't gone through the strategic planning process before they came to us, and now we're trying to develop a fundraising plan. And it's like, well, what do you want to do? And they're like, I don't know. And we're like, okay. So we do need to have a plan for where we want to go to ensure your organization fulfills its mission and vision, thereby effectively serving your beneficiaries, right? So there's different components of a strategic plan, but both internally and externally, they're very important. Internally, they're important because it sets the tone for everyone to be on the same page as to where an organization is going. If the plan is ambiguous and people aren't clear about where an organization wants to go, it makes it very difficult to hold people accountable for certain things. So you want your direction and your strategy and objectives to be aligned, and you want it to be communicated to your team internally. But externally, it's just as important because you want everyone at your organization to be able to articulate the same message, the same narrative, and be on the same page for where you are going. Because if there's conflicting messages coming out of your organization and they're not clear, you begin to test the credibility of your organization in the eyes of prospective funders, right? So the more aligned you can be, the more succinct and uniform you can be with how you're communicating the goals and objectives of your organization, the better. So strategic planning for fundraising. This is what I like to ensure organizations are thinking about in putting their strategic plan for fundraising together. Have a really clear sense of what your core annual programs are. What are you good at? What do you do day in and day out? Be able to articulate them in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and very quickly. Know your annual budgets. I know that this sounds so like basic, but a lot of the organizations that I work with and their boards don't actually know the annual budgets of their organizations. Like their total operating budget, like from a revenue and an expenditure perspective. It's very difficult to fundraise without understanding your numbers and how both the revenue and expenditure side of things work. Evaluation metrics of current programs. People want to know impact. You want to know your impact. You want to know that you're driving change. So make sure that you have evaluation metrics in place before you start the program or fundraising for it or what have you. But mastering steps 1 and 2, step 1 is important before you go to step 2. So the core annual programs, as I mentioned, are the primary programs and services that your organization provides. Just know what they are and just be able to articulate them easily, quickly, and succinctly. Your annual operating budget should be the total operating budget for the institution. But you should know how it breaks out from a revenue and expenditure perspective. So know how much money is coming in philanthropically. Know how much money is coming in through earned revenue, tuition, investment funds, earned revenue. Know what the percentage is, but then also know how you're expending your budget. How much is going towards faculty, staff? How much is going towards programs? How much is going towards capital expenses? It's always helpful to a donor to understand how your organization is operating and how philanthropy actually fits into that overarching budget. So I like to put budgets in pie charts. You can put numbers or you can use percentages, but it's really helpful at a glance for donors to be able to see your numbers in a very clear and concise way. Most of our donors did not know the Smithsonian operated on a $1.2 billion budget. and that 70% of that $1.2 billion budget came through federal appropriations. That's news for a lot of people. But that 30% was made up of different revenue streams. 15% earned revenue, 15% philanthropy. So philanthropy allowed the Smithsonian to do certain things. With the National Museum of African American History and Culture, our goal was to raise $250 million. Congress was appropriating another $250 million. So the total project cost was supposed to be $500 million. But this is before we had a site location, curators, collections, all the architect. So our cost overrun went to about $700 million. But it was helpful in the beginning to have a clear idea of what it was that we were raising money for, and that was just the capital side of things. The federal government was also providing 100% of the staff salaries during the construction of the museum. And then it would go to the 70-30 split after we opened. But being able, giving donors that perspective into the Smithsonian and into the museum was really, really helpful. I'm just talking at a really high level. I'm not going into like the nitty-gritty budget details, but it built credibility with our donors and it allowed them to understand how we were actually operating as a quasi-federal entity and what philanthropy needed to do in order to get this particular project done. This is just an example. We have model organizations that we've built out with our consulting model. So this one is called AI for Kids, and that's their budget. From a strategic planning perspective, what are the new projects? What are the expansion projects that you want your organization to invest in over the next 3 years? Be thoughtful about what it is you want to do. And then once you've identified what you want to do in the next 3 years, it's important to set a budget, and be thoughtful about the budget and don't underestimate what it's going to cost. I have seen so many organizations go into this planning process and don't put salaries in, or they put like a $20,000 salary in, and I'm like, who is doing this work? So make sure that you are compensating your team at competitive wages. Because if you are not full, if you just think about your own personal glass, if you are not full, how are you going to pour into anyone else? So identify your needs, itemize your needs, research the cost, and establish your budget. And make sure it's reflective of everything that you need in order to get these projects done. Because ultimately, that's going to help you identify who you're going to go after and how much you're going to ask them for. Okay, so setting these budgets are really, really, really important. So I also like to present or have organizations present to their donors or prospective funders just at a glance. This is what we are doing. Here are our annual programs. Here are our new projects. This is what our total fundraising goal is. You may have other sources of revenue here, so this may not be reflective of the full fundraising budget, but at a glance, this is what we want to do. This is what college athletics was really good at. They were really good at communicating what it was what they wanted. I mean, it was all about winning, but it was like, oh my gosh, we have Michigan State. We went to the Final Four 3 times when I was there. We need new men's and women's basketball locker rooms. For what? These locker rooms are fantastic. But sure enough, we put another $20 million into the locker rooms. We need additional suites. Okay, we need additional $150 million for new suites. We need to buy out our football coach. We need to raise $1.5 million in 24 hours. We were really clear about what we were raising money for. So anyway, it's just helpful to have these specific. And then once you have kind of your specific goals, you know exactly how much you're raising. I know it's really, people hate when I say gift pyramid because they think it's a Ponzi scheme. It is not. This is just a planning tool, okay? It's called a gift pyramid. But when you set your budget out, you set your fundraising goal out, and you're looking to raise, let's just say, $1 million, you can now put it into a chart that helps you identify how many gifts at what level you need to reach your goal. This was super helpful for me when I was at the Smithsonian, particularly in California. just because I knew where I needed to prioritize my time as a fundraiser. Because many times they would say, hey, can you help us with these $5,000 donors? Nope. I'm focused on the $1 million plus donors right now because that's really where we need to focus our time and effort. Because it'll take me just as long focusing on gifts of 5,000 as it will focusing on $1 million. So I'm going to go to the $1 million. And all of you should too. There's a lot of money out there, remember, like 500 billion. But it also just says, look, we only need 17 gifts to get to $1 million. We're not thinking about like thousands of donors here. We're thinking about being very strategic, building the relationships, and going after 4 prospects for every 1 gift you expect to close. But it's still only 68 people that you need to be in conversation with to reach that goal, right? So this is a way for you to break down that elephant bite by bite, So $1 million may seem like a lot. $10 million may seem like a lot. $100 million may seem like a lot. But when you actually start prioritizing and you start breaking it down, everything becomes much more reasonable. And when you break it out like this for your board or for people that are involved with your organization, they can say, you know what? I know some people that would align with where you want to go. And they have the capacity to give at that $500,000 level. But if you don't have it broken up like this, it's very difficult for people to help you think about who's in their network or who you should be talking to. So I'm just very clear and transparent and just direct. And I know it's not that comfortable, but try and force yourself to do it. You'll get more comfortable over time, trust me. I can talk about any size gift with any person at this stage. Even though every single level of gift that I've asked for in my life and in my career, I had nervousness, right? I had to build courage over time. And then we want to make sure we're planning our stewardship model on the front end. So stewardship means really just making sure that you have an effective way of engaging your donors after they've made a gift to your organization. The worst thing that can happen is someone makes a gift and then you forget about them. Or they get a thank you letter and then they don't hear from you again until you have to make another solicitation. But if you think about your stewardship on the front end and you just build it into your annual plan, just assign someone within your organization to say, hey, I need you to plan a board meeting and dinner once a year, and we're going to invite all of our donors at the $500,000 or $250,000 level. Like everyone at that level, and it doesn't matter if there's 3 people there. That's a really nice, intimate conversation with your board and your leadership, right? It's not about quantity. It's about quality. And then you kind of take it down from there, right? But if you have this prepared, you can actually give this to donors so that they can envision where they want to be as far as supporting your organization. So now you've talked about your aspirational vision, your mission, your really core programs, where you want to go over the next 3 years, and now you're presenting this stewardship chart, and they're saying, you know what? I believe in what you're doing. I see that transformational change that can occur. I think I want to be one of your lead donors. See? That's what we want. We want them to say, this is where I see myself, because I align with what you are doing. So at the museum, overall, I was a part of a team. There were 25 of us on the museum staff in development. The Smithsonian has about 175 development professionals. The museum had 25 when we opened, right? And we ultimately raised about $405 million from scratch. We had no donors when we started in 2005. Now, I didn't start until 2009, but when they started, there was no donors. We ended up at the end with 135 donors at $1 million plus. Those are crazy numbers. This was not a traditional campaign. We only had 3 donors at $20 million, which were the top donor level, which is small for $405 million. But we had a lot of individual $1 million donors. And those $1 million donors were broken into individuals, corporations, and foundations equally. There were 42 individuals that made $1 million plus gifts to this institution. And many of them you would not recognize the names of. 80% of those donors were Black. And people just don't know, you know. Then we had our 110 major contributors. We didn't really push that level hard enough, unfortunately. Hopefully they're pushing it more now. 354 donors giving between $25,000 and $100,000. We were teaching philanthropy, how to do philanthropy for the very first time. A lot of my friends from Howard made $25,000 gifts. A few of them made $100,000 gifts. But I was teaching them how to do it, and Howard has not asked them for a gift yet. So think about your own institutions and who you are under asking, right? These, you know, I graduated in 1999. So there's a lot of people in their 40s and 50s that can make gifts of these sizes. A lot of people, especially if you can pay it over 5 years, which is what the museum accepted. 770 ambassadors. We had a program for the under 40 generation. We started in 2013. By 2016, we had 770 donors under the age of 40 giving $5,000, $10,000, or $20,000 over 5 years. And that's just scratching the surface. So don't overlook those younger donors that are open to getting involved with your organizations. They too can give if you give them a structure. And then we had over 200,000 members. Now that model was crazy. It was a lot. But we raised about $405 million by December of 2017. So these are the things that you want to go into your case for support. So we kind of talked a little bit about each of these pieces, but you want to have a fully published case for support that you can present to donors. And these are the different elements of what you would have in a traditional case for support. Make sure you have images, make sure you have compelling stories, make sure you have your numbers, your fundraising goals, and if you can get a stewardship structure in there, even better. Don't forget to educate donors on the ways they can give. Do you accept pledges over 5 years? Can you accept gifts from donor advised funds? Do you accept planned gifts? Do you accept personal property? And what kind of personal property? Just put it in there. Whatever you accept, just put it, because people don't know unless you tell them. And then please, 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 put your contact information in there. A lot of organizations forget that. And I'm like, well, you just put this whole fundraising piece together and they don't know how to contact you. Or put a QR code directly into your giving page. That's good too. So pitching your case for support, this is basically what you want to do. We ask our organizations that we work with to be able to narrow this down to 5 minutes. People think I'm crazy, but I have literally done $1 million solicitation and I've asked the donor, how much time do I have? And they have said 5 minutes. You have 5 minutes. So if you can't get everything we just covered out in 5 minutes, you need to rethink how you're thinking about your fundraising goals. Questions, and thank you. Yes. Oh.
Raise your hand. Heard from you in this is talking about making all of this data brings confidence in the people you're talking about. Mm-hmm. So you're going to want to, whether you're investing in you're investing into a foundation or organization and making sure that if you can depict that well, you're going to want to make that investment, whether it's a foundation or whether it is a business. That's the clear message I got from this.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, these are foundational elements that you should have in place. And it really does. It works internally and externally. So, yes.
I just want to do a plug for the abundance mentality and how important that was. So a lot of people heard about the Mackenzie Scott gifts. I mean, just these giant gifts that just came out of the blue. One, a good thing for making sure that the public knows kind of what you're doing, because they were doing all this research behind the place. But there was a real worry that nonprofits weren't going to be able to activate on these tens of millions of dollars gifts. The groups that were able to do really well with that were those groups that had given themselves permission to dream and said, I know what it's going to take to solve the problem of creating a safe urban space for kids in California City X. And they knew what that number was, and they could activate on that. And I think nonprofits need to give themselves permission We do a lot of budget planning for the what if scenarios on the bad side. I think that organizations should also feel confident to do the what if someone wins the lottery and dream, because that is one of the things that donors are looking for. And oh, it's going to cost X to solve this entire problem. That's it? Oh, okay, sure. Then you ain't asking hard enough. So, but yeah, abundance mentality is so critical, and it can be inspiring to donors, foundations, and individual major donors.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you.
I'm very conscious of the fact that both in the room and certainly on the live stream, there'll be people who are in smaller congregations who would love to dream big, have often dreamt big, and to go from a small congregation to a significant social service in the town, in the end they're coping with disappointment because they were thinking abundance and they ended up not hitting the goal. And, when the Haiti earthquake took place, the National Church of the Episcopal Church supported the campaign to rebuild that cathedral. They had a target of 20 million, they only hit 2.5 million. It all went in soft costs, it never happened, and they were dreaming big. Mm-hmm. So how do you respond to people who have the abundance mentality, but don't end up getting anywhere near the abundance goal?
Yes. Okay, that's a great question. So when you're thinking about abundance and aspirational vision, these are long-term ideas. They're not 3-year ideas, they're not 5-year ideas. But you do need to break that vision into realizable steps. So over the next 3 to 5 years, here's what we believe we can accomplish in moving us closer to that aspirational vision. And understanding it may even take longer than 20 years. If you're thinking about a 20-year time horizon, it may take longer than 20 years, or a 10-year time horizon. But over the next 3 to 5 years, this is what we realistically believe that we need. And then I also think in the budget planning process, you've got to think about the staff that's going to be required, the technology that's going to be required in order to get to goal. So let's just say you put a $10 million or a $20 million goal out there and you don't hire any development professionals. It becomes really difficult to get to that number. Or the organization says, well, we're going to put 20 million out there, but we're not going to go through the process of developing collateral, or we're not going to invest in a CRM or any sort of data management systems. So understanding and having conversation with others about what a $20 million goal is going to require. The gift pyramid is also very helpful. Because in a campaign, whether it be an annual campaign or a longer comprehensive campaign or capital campaign, whatever it may be, you really want to secure your leadership gifts first. So if you're looking at a $20 million goal, one of the objectives would be how many donors can we identify at the $5 million level, the $10 million level early before you go public with anything. Because that's going to get you 25 to 50% of your way towards your goal. And then you can start to look at some of the other levels. And maybe you start to look at the $1 million level. If it's a $20 million campaign, you really need someone at that $5 million level. And then you're going to need a series of people at $1 million, but not, just a handful, not a lot. But you want to secure that early funding, early large funding before you go public with a much larger goal. So just thinking like, strategically, how do we get there? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
From online, lots of words of appreciation and encouragement, and I'll summarize by one person's quote, which was, "Preach it." And then we have some questions, starting with the really practical and then going on to some that might require some more discussion. One person asks that you share the last slide again. They felt it was really powerful and wanted to see it again. Another person asked, said, you took us through step 1, did they miss step 2? So if maybe you could reiterate that.
Yes, I realized that I took some slides out of here. So step 2 is really thinking about those 3-year goals, really thinking about the new projects or expansion projects your organization wants to make investments in, and then going through the process of budgeting for them, But then also parts of step 2 were with the total fundraising goal, making sure you have a comprehensive perspective of everything that you're going to need, and then also developing your stewardship structure. So those are technically part 2. My apologies for like being too ambitious and taking out too many slides. I was trying to get it into 45 minutes. But yes, so it was all in there, part 1 and part 2. Part 3 is the actual fundraising piece, which is not included in here.
Thank you. And then if I may, just one more detailed question. How does all of this apply to an international NGO when you cannot necessarily meet with people directly? And the second part, what is the cost for small nonprofits to work with your company?
Okay, an international NGO. So the pandemic has taught us a lot about virtual meetings, virtual dialogue, virtual everything. I mean, even within our firm, I had to travel a lot more before the pandemic than I do now. And while I haven't been in the direct frontline fundraising capacity since the pandemic, I thoroughly believe that there's an opportunity for development professionals and organizational leaders to have conversation and communication via Zoom. I would use virtual platforms versus just the phone, but I was on the phone all the time before. So let's not forget that we also do have phones and we can talk to people. They actually appreciate it. I mean, people like to actually talk on the phone about organizations that they care for. So, and then as far as working with our firm, so if it's a small nonprofit, what I recommend, and I didn't put it in here, I probably should have, the company that we started for small nonprofits to go online and build their cases for support, like a fully self-guided case for support that'll take them through all of these steps, is called Ask a Fundraiser. So you can just go to askafundraiser.com. It's $1,200 a year, $100 a month, so we break it down monthly for you if $1,200 feels like too much. And you have access to the platform for a year. And you can take your organization through the process of developing each of these steps. We have instructional videos, we have step-by-step instructions, and at the end of that process, you will walk away with a fully designed case for support. Now, if you really want it beautiful, get your graphic designer to do it, but we do have a fundraising case for support that you can download at the end. So, we have, I don't know, one more, and then I think we're at time.
Can you talk about prospecting? You gotta start with who are we going to talk to?
Yes. So, I mean, I have a whole nother presentation for the actual fundraising process. Identification is the first stage of being able to identify donors. There are numerous free resources out there that your organization can look to do research. At our firm, we subscribe to iWave, which is a little bit expensive for small nonprofits. It's probably $3,700 or so a year. And maybe we're a corporation, so it may be less for a nonprofit. But, and then also I subscribe to Inside Philanthropy, which has all of the big foundations broken out by sector. And there's contact information in there and all of that good stuff. But there's a ton of free resources that are available too. When I was at the museum though, I mean, I did have a research team, but I kind of did a non-traditional approach to research. I actually just started going out to California, going to comparable organizations, Black museums, Black organizations, and taking their pictures of their donor walls and like their board of directors. And then I would take those people and I would say, hey, research team, I need you to tell me what you think their capacity is, and I need you to get their contact information. And I am a very good, persistent, ridiculously persistent cold caller. Yeah, so there's multiple different things, but I also was very direct. When we had our giving levels, I would go to a donor and just say, I need donors. I need people in your network that have the capacity to give $1 million, $100,000, and $25,000. And they would literally give me names in those categories, like literally. And then I would take it back to research and I would just say, can you vet whether or not these people have this capacity? And the ones that came back as yes or close, that's where I focused my time and attention. So. There's lots of different ways to do it. Thank you so much. Thank you.
And I think we just saw a preview of some of the classes that might be coming up from Lifelong Learning. There's so much left out of that presentation that we want to bring it back. We're going to take a break right now. We will be back at 3 o'clock. For those of you online, this is also your opportunity to get yourself a cookie or something. For those of us here, there are cookies and other snacks right outside that door. The restrooms are outside to your right. You will see them there. There's coffee also right across the hall. We'll see you back here at 3 o'clock Eastern. Hello, hello. There we go. Ladies and gentlemen, if we could start coming back to our seats, please. We want to make sure we are keeping on schedule, mainly for our online contingent as well. We have about 100 people online as well, so their bio breaks, they probably don't get as much opportunity to talk to other people other than their dog, maybe. So, which, if it's my puppy, that could take a while. So I just want to make sure that we're all coming on back in to be with us. For those of you who are online, what you have seen in between some of the speakers and during the breaks were some of the QR codes. One is for the event on the 22nd of October, which will be the follow-up event to the symposium, which will be an opportunity to deepen the conversation and also to talk a little bit more about upcoming programming. And the other QR code that is on there is also the QR code for the evaluation of today's symposium. We just want to hear from you so that we can do that. So I just, in keeping with tradition, I want to make sure that we start exactly on time. So you have about 30 seconds of me longer. There you are, sorry. Also, by the way, on the topic of abundance versus scarcity, when I wrap it up, talking about the theology of all this, we will also be talking about that. And certainly, Father Nouwen, Henry Nouwen, certainly talked about God's abundance. So we will be talking a little bit about that in today's conversation as well. So, there we are, coming up on 3 o'clock Eastern. There we are. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. It's 3 o'clock.
Thank you, Lorenzo. Glad you all came back in the room and in the space. And it's my pleasure now to introduce Alice Ferris. Now, when I got my master's degree, Alice was one of my instructors. And I have to say that my advisor, early on when I was setting up classes, he said, I don't care what else you do, you want to get into Alice's class. And it was really wonderful. And you're going to get to hear some of what she has to say here in just a moment. But she's the founding partner of Goalbusters, and she's had more than 30 years of professional fundraising experience. But before she was a professional, she helped blow bubbles across the stage at a Lawrence Welk events, which I think that's, I know, wow. She's worked across the board in charitable areas, and she does public media, rural health care, education, and science. She thrives in finding solutions for fundraisers and organizations. But I know that she wants everyone to have joy in what they do. If you don't have joy, Alice doesn't want to work for you. So I just want to say that. She was the 21st recipient of the AFP Founders Medallion, recognizing extraordinary service to the sector. That is amazing. She also has CFRE and the ACFRE. I think you're one of only 21 people to have 120 people worldwide that have the ACFRE accreditation. She teaches for the Master of Nonprofit Leadership at the University of Denver University College, which is where I first met her. And when she's not fundraising, she throws epic Chinese New Year parties. And I understand you're a retired competition ballroom dancer. Okay, so Alice Ferris.
Thank you, Linda. Hello, everybody. So thank you very much for the generous introduction. And yes, I did blow bubbles onto the set for fundraising events on Wisconsin Public Television, now PBS Wisconsin, because I was the smallest volunteer at the time. I was about 16 years old, and I fit behind one of the set pieces. So they handed me a bottle of bubble soap and said, start blowing. Unfortunately, I was slightly asthmatic, so they were really tiny bubbles. So as I have started my fundraising career, as you can imagine, things have changed a little bit since my start at PBS Wisconsin. And so today, it's my job to talk about the intersection of technology and fundraising. But before I do that, I wanted to build on something that Anna talked about. She talked about the definition of fundraising. And the additional thing I'd like to add is what's the definition of philanthropy? Because we've also talked about philanthropy today. So what is the definition of philanthropy? Any thoughts? I'll take some from online if anybody has them too. Okay, just because generosity, thank you. Marshall, I'm going to out you.
Well, think of the root of the word, love of man, person, love of person.
Absolutely. So philanthropy, if you break it down to the root, is philos anthropos. So it's love of your fellow man. And I think that's an appropriate way to start this, because even though we're talking about technology, it's still about philanthropy. It's still about love of your fellow human being. So how can we take the tools that we have available to make sure that we can continue to focus on that human element, continue to focus on the interaction between people, and giving people the opportunity to invest in causes and abundance that's something that they want to make an impact on. So that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about today, about being not a bot. But before I get into the details, what are we actually using AI for right now? And again, I will take some suggestions from online or from the group, and I will repeat them for the recording. But what are we using AI for right now? What are you using? Pardon me? Writing marketing scripts, absolutely. What else? Meeting summaries. I love AI for meeting summaries. Anything else?
People are using it for development of websites and data associated with it.
Yep, developing websites. Actually, one of the things that you started to touch on there is you can also use it for data analytics. So like one of my favorite things is to take a file that is a total mess and dump it into ChatGPT and say, turn it into a file that aligns with these parameters so I can upload it into something else, and it does a brilliant job with that. So we are using AI for a lot of different things. But here's what the Harvard Business Review says we're using it for. And the biggest chunk is this one over here, 23%. We're doing technical assistance and troubleshooting. So if you have used Google in the past for something like, how do I fix my dryer? You can now use ChatGPT for this. I did actually do that once, and I made my son document the entire thing just in case I broke something. But now you can go to ChatGPT, and it's going to answer these questions for you. Somebody said to me last week that one of the things that she does is that she opens up her refrigerator and says, I do not know what to make for dinner. And she will put into ChatGPT, here are the ingredients that I have for dinner, what can I do with them? And then it'll come up with all sorts of ideas. So that's kind of technical assistance and troubleshooting. We are also doing things like you mentioned, content creation and editing. We're doing personal and professional support. We're doing learning and education, creativity and recreation, research analysis and decision making. What do those actually mean? Well, the top 6 ways that people were specifically saying they were using AI in this report that was how people are really using Gen AI from the Harvard Business Review, number 1 was generating ideas. But number 2, does that concern you a little bit? Absolutely. They're using it for therapy and companionship. I actually have a very good friend who will not be annoyed that I'm shouting him out right now. Josh Hirsch is a friend of mine who is making himself into the preeminent expert in nonprofit fundraising AI. And he has built his own therapist on ChatGPT. I have overruled ChatGPT therapist a couple times where I basically say, Josh, come on. But when we think about how people are really using Gen AI, it is kind of concerning that people are using it to replace that human element. So that's not what I'm going to talk about today. But what I do want to suggest to you is that there are ways to use technology to reinforce the relationship development that we're doing right now. Because again, to build on Anna's presentation, one of the things that she talked about was what are those different stages of fundraising? And one of them is coming up with that big vision and coming up with that mission. And I do have one mission to add to the list of really good mission statements, because my dad, for close to 30 years, worked for the Sisters of St. Mary healthcare system. And so they had their mission statement literally carved in granite on the side of the wall in their lobby, because their mission statement was to reveal the healing power of God. And I'm thinking, oh, that's not getting edited. So that's something that we can take and make sure that we have the tools to be able to reinforce the way they do that. And as we go through this process of doing fundraising, we mentioned earlier the idea of identification being your first stage. That's how you're essentially figuring out who are the people that you're going to talk to. We can use technology to help with that stage. The next stage is the getting to know people. introducing yourself and getting to know people. Again, we can use technology to be able to reinforce those pieces. Then the next stage after that is actually asking for the money. Surprisingly, as Anna already alluded to, you can use technology to do some of these things. And then the stewardship phase, once again, you can use technology to support your tactics. Because how many people in the room have enough time to do everything they need to do? No? Nobody. Linda might in the future. But yeah, we all have a lot of things to do, and none of us have enough time to do it all. So we can use technology to support what we're doing and help make our time more efficient and more effective. So the way that I want to frame this is that we are in the new frontier. This is the new frontier of the way we do our work. And when you think about frontiers, maybe because I currently live west of the Rocky Mountains, so I live in Flagstaff, Arizona, I think of the Wild West, of that this is the new frontier. And when you think about how people migrated across the country, and actually I thought Rob's chart of all of the community foundations kind of reflected in many respects how we migrated across the country. Because you don't have as many of those established institutions in the West because people got there last. And so when we think about how people migrated across the country during the romanticized period of the Wild West, the first people who started going across the country were the loners. They were going from the east to the west to give themselves a new life, to basically start over. And it was about how can I benefit from these things for me? How can I strike gold? How can I escape some situation that I want to escape? It was really about how does this benefit me? But at some point, we started going out in groups. But those groups were typically people you knew. So the next wave of people moving across the country during the Wild West times were groups of we. So this was I know the other people in this covered wagon train. And we are all going to stick together as a family or extended family to be able to benefit from the things that we can discover. So that's when we went from me to we. But at some point, we went to the time of building communities for people who were going to come after us that we would never know. And that's when we moved into the they mode, where we are now going to establish things that we can benefit from, but will benefit people in the future. And so as we think about the new frontier of technology and AI and nonprofit work, I'm going to frame this in that way. There are going to be tools that you have right now that will benefit you in a me kind of way. This is going to make my time more effective. But there are also going to be things that we can do that will make things easier for our institution or our organization or our department. So those are the we things that we can benefit from. And then the last part is the they things. How can we put things into place that will benefit people who will come after us that we will never know? So that's the framing I'm going to give to you today about how these different technologies can help you in the work that you're doing. And while this is focused on fundraising techniques, this can also help with other things you're doing. So it's not just things that you can use for fundraising, but for the way that you do your work. So let's get started with what AI can and can't do. Now, we had some recommended books earlier. I wrote down one of them. I'm going to look up Andrew Carnegie's work and read that book. So this is another book that I would recommend you take a look at if you want to have more information about AI. Ethan Mollick has written this book, Co-Intelligence, Living and Working with AI. And he is really kind of the academic expert right now on how AI is used in just general business community as well as academics. And one of the things that he talks about when he thinks about how AI works is that AI is essentially an incredibly qualified intern. So think about that. If you have ever worked with an intern, did you just hand them a project and say, go run with it? Probably not. And if you did, you probably learned to regret it. But really what we're looking at with an intern is that I have some really exceptional interns. And I will say, just a moment of athletic competition. I saw you were from Michigan State. Sorry, University of Wisconsin. Go Badgers. But I have some really good interns from the University of Wisconsin, and I have to give them instructions. I have to give them parameters. I have to check their work. I'm not going to just say, hey, Catherine, go do this thing, and then never look at it again. That's the thing to think about when you're thinking about AI and ChatGPT in particular, the large language models like ChatGPT, Gemini, some of the other ones, is that they have all of the information of the interwebs at their fingertips, and they are trying to make you happy. LLMs have actually been programmed to try to make their human overlords happy. And if we just let them run, they will come up with things that are not so good. But if we check their work and give them guidance, they will do a much better job in giving you the output that you want. So who has experimented a little bit with ChatGPT or some of the LLMs? Do they give you 100% good output the first time? No, absolutely not. In fact, there have been times when I've been extremely frustrated with ChatGPT, and I'll say, that was terrible. That'll be my next prompt. And it will say, I'm sorry, I will give you a revised output, because it really, really wants you to be happy. Actually, Dean Markham, I read your commentary, what was it, last year? No, it was December of 2022, I think it was, when it was first hitting the popular press. And you wrote an amazing commentary that was written by ChatGPT. So one of the things that we want to do is give it prompts. So if you haven't played around with this, what you do is you give it instructions. The key thing about ChatGPT and the LLMs is the more you can give it in advance, the better, because it needs that guidance. You are essentially giving it the box within the parameters it can work. So as we think about what it can and can't do, if you give it detailed instructions, it can give you some pretty good output, but it's never something that you should take and run with it. It is definitely stuff that always needs some degree of editing. So I won't go into too much more on the technical aspects of ChatGPT, but if you want to follow up with me later, I'm happy to talk through some of the specifics that might apply to your program. Because one of the things that I like to do, as Linda mentioned in my bio, is that I just love to solve problems. I'm kind of a puzzle person. In fact, if there was like a 1,000-piece puzzle on this table right now, I could not walk by it. I would be stuck there for the next hour. But as we think about these different things that we can do, I come from the lens of a very small shop. Most of the organizations I've worked with have been 10 people or less. And in my consulting practice, that's the size organization also that we work with. So as much as we can automate some of this stuff, the better, because I know, once again, no one has all the time in the world. So as we start to think about this, I want to, again, come back to the me, we, they framing. So what are we doing right now with the me? What are we doing with AI right now in our fundraising strategies or in our organization strategies? Some of the things that we can do are writing. I'm glad you brought up writing. So one of the things that these LLMs are really good at is that really bad first draft. I am one of those people that's absolutely terrible at starting with a blank page. If you give me a blank page and say, I need you to write a letter to a donor that is about this long, about this topic, I will freeze up. And in the past, I've had other people draft that first. So maybe it's someone who is more directly related to the program. Maybe it's one of my other team members. But my first thing is always, I'm really good at editing someone else's work. The nice thing about using ChatGPT and the like is that they will come up with that first draft for you. So I can say, for instance, I am representing the Experimental Aircraft Association, which is one of our clients. And I can say, I need a direct mail piece that is going to be roughly 2 pages long, one side, front, and back. It is going to be addressed to a lifetime member of EAA. And I want it to touch on Kid Venture and Young Eagles, 2 of their youth engagement programs. It can come up with a draft that is going to be simply terrible. And then I can say, okay, I liked this part, I didn't like this part, I liked this part, I didn't like this part. And then it will come up with something else. And I can go through this iteration over and over and over until I get something that's relatively close. And this has saved us a ton of time. In fact, for that same example, you can also use it to edit copy. So like one of the things that they talk about in fundraising is that you should be writing at approximately 6th to 8th grade level. I also have worked in the past with science organizations. The people at the Vatican Observatory are not writing at an 8th grade level. So I can take whatever they're writing and put it into ChatGPT and say, please adjust this copy to an 8th grade level. And then, frankly, I'll take it back because it will not sound like the signer at all. And then I will rewrite it in that person's voice. But at least it helps me with some of that grade level language. The other thing that you can do is completely change voice. This was hysterical. So back to EAA for a moment. For a similar campaign, we had written a copy, a bit of marketing copy, that was pretty straightforward. And at the last minute, we decided that we were going to change that copy to be coming from their superhero. Because yes, the Experimental Aircraft Association has a superhero named Avior. He was donated by Stan Lee, actually, which was kind of cool. And there was enough online that ChatGPT could pull from about Avior that I could say, here's our copy. And it was like, thank you for supporting youth education programs at the Experimental Aircraft Association. You make possible Young Eagles and Kid Venture and blah, 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 blah. And I pasted it in and I said, rewrite this in the voice of Avior. And what came out was, greetings, aviator. And frankly, it was so good that we just used it. So that's one of the rare occasions where it's like, yeah, just take it and run with it. But that's one of those things that you can do. You can completely change voice. The other thing, however, more seriously that I've done recently is that I also work with an organization that is in Yuma, Arizona, which is right at the border of the US and Mexico. And so we have a strongly bilingual community that we're talking to. And we were having a tough time translating stuff into Spanish. And what we discovered was that if you give ChatGPT the framework of, you are a 50-something native Spanish language speaker living at the US-Mexico border in Yuma, Arizona. Please translate this in a business formal language into Spanish. And it came back, and we actually ran it by a native Spanish speaker to make sure that it wasn't, total gibberish. It was almost flawless. There were the couple of words that came back as different. I actually pasted into ChatGPT. I said, here's the translation we received from a human natural language speaker. Please describe to me the differences between these two versions. And it came back with, okay, this is different because of gender. This is different because of business formality. Either one would work. Which one would you prefer? And it came back with a new result that we ran by the Spanish language speaker who said, yep, that is totally usable. So that's the power of this tool that you can use that will speed up what you need to do and hopefully make it more effective. I really liked that one. The other things that you can do are time management pieces. Because again, none of us had enough time to do anything except maybe Linda later. And so when we're looking at the time management piece, one of the things it can do is routinize things that you can routinize. Because I'm sure there are things in your life where you think, man, if I could get a robot to do this, this would be awesome. And I'm going to jump over to personal assistants. So one of the things that I like about ChatGPT is travel planning. Has anyone tried that? Yeah, pretty cool, huh? So one of the things that I'd like to do, because it's just for my personal sanity, is that when I travel places, I like to build in some fun things. And so last year, I had the privilege to speak at the Swiss fundraising conference. And I'd never been to Switzerland. And so I have to fit all of this stuff in while I'm there. But I knew the days that I needed to be in Bern. And so I asked ChatGPT, I will be in Switzerland from this date to this date. On these days I need to be in Bern. Please create a sample travel itinerary for me. And it came up with this brilliant thing, along with like expected weather and all of these other things, so that I could have help packing. And so that's the kind of thing where I could have gone down a rabbit hole for hours trying to schedule that trip. And instead, I had, again, a good rough draft to start out with so that I could do some nuancing as I got closer. The other thing that it can do in terms of routine tasks is that gift processing piece. So if there are things that you are doing that you know are the same routine over and over again, it usually can work out those things. And often, other people have developed those bots for you, and you can just take them and run with them. But I want to jump down to analytics. We mentioned the question about the how do you know who to talk to? And this is one of those things that AI is going to be exceptional at because it already is. When you think about taking the list that Anna mentioned of here are all of the people that I want to find something out about, generally the organizations I work with don't have a research team. And so they're Googling or they're using iWave or some other similar product. And they are trying as much as possible to get information, but there's so much information. In fact, one of the things I used to say to people is that if you're going to do prospect research, set a timer, because you're going to be online and you're going to be Googling Rob, and then all of a sudden, 2 hours later, you're watching cat videos on YouTube. So set a timer, because you will go down a rabbit hole. But the nice thing is now with ChatGPT and similar products, you can use that to get a much more refined bit of information on people that you potentially want to talk to that is publicly available. So this isn't being too sneaky, but it gives you an opportunity to kind of summarize some of those pieces. So that's the me stuff. That's making your work better. How do we get into some of the we stuff? You know, how can we use these tools to make our organizations more effective? Well, there's a whole bunch of different ways. But one of the things that is a little scary is that you are starting to see more and more nonprofit organizations use chatbots. And initially, that feels a little creepy. It's back to the AI therapist. Do I really want to go down that path? But what it often can do is get rid of some of that human interaction for some of the basic questions. So this is not saying I'm going to impersonate a person that's on my staff. This is saying on a frequently asked questions page, for instance, where someone's already going to your website to get that information, you have a little chatbot that comes up. It says, oh, thank you for visiting our page. How can I help you today? And that seems much more personable than just saying, hey, scroll down this really long FAQ page and try to figure out what your question is. So simple things like, for instance, for monthly giving or tithing. If someone wanted to change a credit card number, if you're taking this on credit card, you potentially could do that through a customer service bot. So that's just one way to think about that piece. But the other things to think about are role playing. So if you are preparing to do an ask in 5 minutes to a potential donor, how could you test that? How could you essentially role play it before you actually get into that person's presence? And you could do it with an AI bot. In fact, we've tried this before. It's probably going to end up in the next iteration of my technology strategy for fundraising class, which is the come up with your donor profile, paste it into ChatGPT saying, you are this person, and then start the dialogue with the bot and say, here's my 5-minute pitch. And then what would this person potentially respond with? What are the questions that they might have? What are the holes in my argument? What are the things that, oh geez, maybe I shouldn't say that? So that gives you an opportunity to kind of stress test what you're doing before you actually have to interact with a human. The other thing that I really like as a potential thing for organizations to use is this idea of team onboarding. Now, Rob mentioned Rockefeller and the fact that there are fundamental values from John D. Rockefeller that are still part of the Rockefeller Foundation. That is a testament to that organization being able to communicate their values from generation to generation to generation. But what about your congregation or your organization or your community? How can you communicate values and fundamentals that you are establishing now to future people who are going to work at your organization? And this idea of team onboarding in a LLM is actually becoming one of those things, where you can put in here's the mission of our organization, here's the vision of our organization, here are the core values of our organization, and use it as a way to communicate those through technology. So that's kind of more of the we things. But before I go into the they things, I also want to talk a little bit about the whatabouts. So the question marks that come up about using all of this technology. Because we've already mentioned the question mark about therapy. But are there other kind of icky sticking points that are already coming to mind about technology use? Oh, environmental is a huge one. And this is actually one of those things that people underestimate because of the computing load that you need for all of this. This is also something that came up with cryptocurrency, of does your organization accept cryptocurrency? And there was one organization I was working with that was working to protect polar bear habitats. And they were thinking about cryptocurrency. And I said, have you considered? And they ended up putting in their gift acceptance policy that they would not accept cryptocurrency because of the environmental footprint. What are some of the other icky, sticky things? Plagiarism, absolutely. Security, privacy. Yeah, politics.
You touched on this a little bit, but it's not going to give you the full 100% solution.
Yes.
It's still going to have errors in it that you need to make sure that you work through it.
It's still going to have problems. It's not going to give you 100% good. And hallucinations, yes. There are a ton of hallucinations because what did I say at the beginning? They want to make you happy. It wants to make you happy. And so if it takes making up stuff to make you happy, it will make stuff up. I mean, think about it. It's almost like a 4-year-old of yeah, I did that. It's like, no, you didn't actually, but I want to make you happy, so I'm going to say I did. There are so many strange ethical considerations to think about that we have not thought about. One of the task forces that I served on was actually a group with Rogare, which is an international fundraising think tank, that was not talking about the answers to these questions, but coming up with the research agenda of what do we need to ask more questions about when it comes to AI and ethics. And there are so many things, but the privacy and permission piece and the plagiarism piece is a key piece that we all need to worry about. Do we even have rights to use this information? The other thing to think about is integrated bias. So when you think about the information that we are putting into these LLMs and the people who are programming the LLMs, it's not that we have, for the most part, specifically said, hey, I want to institutionalize bias. But considering the data set that they're pulling from, there will be institutionalized bias. For instance, I asked it to rewrite, because I was testing this piece, I asked it at one point to rewrite a piece of copy that I had in the voice of a 53-year-old Asian American female. I was not happy with the results because it ended up adding language that it assumed a female would say as opposed to a male. And it was stuff that I would never say. Now, granted, I didn't give it any more guidance than that. So I could have refined it. But at the same time, it's like, okay, that's a bit of integrated bias into this. So how do we make sure that we control for some of these things, as well as second-order effects? This is something I didn't even think about until I was on this task force. And that's the idea of, when I said that LLMs are very well-qualified interns, it actually means that these LLMs are taking some of those duties away from interns and away from entry-level positions. So thinking about educational institutions, we now have to prepare people at a much higher level because they will be entering the workforce not at our traditional entry-level position. They will be entering the workforce essentially at a late entry-level or middle management position, because a lot of the things that they would have done as an entry-level position are now being automated. So that's the second order effect there of are we taking jobs away? Actually, we are, as much as people have said we're not. but we're also adding jobs in other areas. So how can we think about how we train people as educational institutions so that they're better prepared for this workforce? So that's, a lot to say that it can be scary out there, but then the other thing to think about, to spin this in a positive way, is that the LLM that you use right now, if you logged on to ChatGPT right now this second, that is the worst artificial intelligence tool that you will ever use, because it is going to get better next hour, next day, next week, next month, next year. It will constantly get better because we are feeding it more and more information, which gets to the privacy issue. But it is one of those things to think about, of what are the implications of some of the things that we might use these tools for. So in order to control for some of those things, I am just encouraging people that regardless of your organization and regardless of how you use it, think consciously about the policies that you're using. What policies do you have to address the use of LLMs? Taking this from an academic hat for a moment, this is something that we have talked about a lot at the University of Denver and a lot at the other academic institutions that I'm working with. And I remember that I got a little pushback in my class because my class is called Technology Strategy for Fundraising. And I told them they had to use ChatGPT. And the first round where I said you had to use ChatGPT, I actually had to have a conversation with my department chair to say, look, I'm going to turn off your AI detecting software for these assignments, and here's why. It's not because I'm letting people get away with cheating. It's because they have to know how to use this. Regularly audit your results, so don't just take them and run with them. And then also always include a human in the mix. I think this is the most critical piece. Ethan Mollick's book was called Co-Intelligence for a reason. This is about working with AI rather than just handing things off to AI. There's the link to the Rogare study if you're interested. Again, it was all about what questions can we ask. It was not about finding the answers. And we hope within the next year or two that we will have a little bit more in depth on the answers part of this report. So let's move into the they category. How can technology help build community? How can it reinforce the values and mission and vision that you have moving forward into future generations? Well, there's a lot of things you can do with this. But one of the things that GPTs are really, really good at is synthesizing what came before. Not so good at coming up with innovative new ideas, but what it can do is look at everything you've done before and figure out what do these things have in common and how can I put them together in new and interesting ways. So one of the things, for instance, that I really like doing for it, and that a friend of mine did, his name is Chad Barger. He's Fundraiser Chad on most social media. And he created the Fundraising Chad GPT, because he's written thousands upon thousands of blogs. And so he dumped in all of this content that he had created before, and then started asking Fundraiser Chad GPT questions. And it would come up with new blogs for him, because it was pulling off of his own voice, which I believe, Dean Markham, that's how you did for your AI commentary, was that, okay, here's a sample of some other stuff, and let's synthesize a little bit more. So it's really good at synthesizing what has been done before. The other thing that it can do, in spite of the fact that we're a little concerned about AI therapists, it can help people connect. So when we think about isolation, and we think about all of the ways that we connect now post-pandemic that we didn't used to connect on, one of the things we do is, of course, using technology. And so how can we use these things, like those chatbots, to be able to have the opportunity to interact with people even when we personally can't do that interaction? So it does give us the opportunity to institutionalize your voices and really have that conversation with someone, even though you're not having the conversation real time with them. The key, though, with that one is making sure, once again, that you always have a human in the mix. Because what we don't want to do is just make this something where you're only interacting with technology. And The last thing that I think this does a really good job with is back to the routinization. Let's take the stuff out of the mix that's distracting you from the human interaction. So as we deal with that human interaction, we can now prioritize that piece, as opposed to saying, you know, hey, I have all these other things I need to do. I really don't have time to have that personal interaction with you. So what I hope the future of AI brings to us is more space to be able to do the things that we are exceptionally good at, which is dealing with each other as humans. So the one thing I wanted to wrap up with is this idea. Recently, actually this year, I have become a strange evangelist for the Modern Elder Academy. Chip Conley is the co-founder of this organization, and they are dealing with how people go through transitions from roughly 45 until whenever you want to stop transitioning into other things. But the Modern Elder Academy has this concept of knowledge is learned. And we all have knowledge that we've learned, whether in school or in church or at work. These are things that we know as facts and figures. But wisdom is lived and shared. So you can have knowledge, and if you don't share it, it's not wisdom. You can have knowledge, and if you don't live it, it's not wisdom. But the moment you shift into hey, I've got this knowledge and I'm going to share it with you because I've lived this experience and I want you to learn something from it, then it becomes wisdom. I think AI is giving us the opportunity to have at our fingertips far more knowledge than we ever have had before. But we need to use that knowledge to be able to convert it into wisdom. So how can we take this tool and take that knowledge and make it something that we live ourselves and share with other people? So back to the frontier. Again, the me part of this frontier is how can AI make my job easier? How can AI help me better manage my time, energy, and attention? But then it becomes also the we thing of how can AI help us all have the tools within our organization or institution to be able to be more effective. But then we also have to think about the they. What's that next stage of how we can use this technology to institutionalize values for those that we will not know coming in the future? So hopefully that gave you some ideas on how AI is going to be more useful for you, and hopefully take a little bit of the scary stuff out. And I hope that you'll try something in the next week, just anything, and see what you can do with ChatGPT or some other tool, because just play with it and see what comes out. Thank you. And I'm happy to take some questions if you have any. Anna has one up here. Very nice, very good. I mean, we're looking at how to integrate AI, so this was very timely. My biggest concern that none of my team seems to have a concern about is security and privacy. Mm-hmm. And so we've hired an attorney to help us interpret all of the AI sites that we're using to do our work and then incorporate it into our contracts. But I mean, what are your recommendations around ensuring, not from the donor perspective, but from the organizational perspective, we can keep data private? Like if we have patent applications that we're trying to review, if we have grant applications that we're trying to synthesize, do you have any recommendations around that and what we should be doing? There are various levels of strictness for how you think the LLMs are using this information. And some of the organizations that I've interacted with will create their own internal GPT. So they're taking the back-end programming that are available through ChatGPT because it's open source, and then making something that only lives within their system. Most organizations don't have the capacity to do that. So you're still using kind of the open source available, publicly available GPTs. One of the things that I will do is if it's information that I would not publicly share with a donor, then it doesn't go into the GPT. So kind of a similar type of strategy of when I put information into a CRM, into a database. It's if I wouldn't want the donor to see that information, I'm not going to put it into that person's record. So it's the same type of thing. It's if I'm putting it into a publicly accessible GPT, I will anonymize the information. So instead of it being, Joe Schmo, it'll be Joe Smith, and that way it still has the specific data, but it's not necessarily directly attributable to a person. The other thing to think about, back to grant proposals, is that I actually do use GPTs a lot for grant proposals, because that is one of those things that it's really good at. So like if you have, this answer must be 200 words, and a Ph.D. in astronomy has given you 2,000, you can use it to condense it down into a much shorter thing. But part of it is that almost all of that stuff that I've been given, I ask them ahead of time, is this stuff that's publicly available information? If it's anything that's proprietary, then I'm not going to put it into that GPT. That's just my gut level feeling. They've said a lot about how these are protected and they're not using your data to program, but I don't 100% trust that yet. So the other thing to think about, though, the flip side of this and the counter argument is that the more information that these GPTs get, the less you have the built-in bias, because it's kind of looking for that broad range of information. So some of the stuff I do proactively put into the publicly available stuff, not that I think they're using it to program it, but just in case someday they might. Hopefully it'll give them a little bit of a different perspective. Was there a question online?
There's one over here.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. The first question is about how do you use AI to kind of help ensure against misinformation? Like, how can we use it to better kind of protect against misinformation? And then dovetailing with your comment about bias, which is fascinating to me that there's already like an existing bias in this new system. But in terms of the nuances of cultural competency, is that something that we can expect from it? Even with putting more information on there, it doesn't seem like it might be a realistic thing that it can actually, be able to achieve. And so I just wanted some of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think there's a few things here. To the point about the built-in bias, I think that one of the things that I like about this system is that it will take new inputs. And so if you tell it, that was a terrible answer and here's why, it will remember that information if you're using the tool the right way. So the more information that you give it ahead of time in the prompts, which can be very complex, the more that you can take that information and kind of craft the voice so that it is more culturally appropriate, that it does have a better alignment. For instance, one of the organizations we work with is the Hopi Education Endowment Fund. And actually, we do quite a bit of work with the Hopi tribe and their charitable organizations. And there are certain Hopi words that are really not translatable into English. And so we've kind of programmed those in, saying, here are some words and here are the concepts around those words, and we want to make sure to use them. And it does a reasonably good job about addressing those pieces. And as we start to develop these tools out, the other thing that I like to think about with these GPTs is because it's always learning, the next, like I said, this is the worst iteration you'll ever work with. It will continually get better. And the more information we give it and the more reinforcement we give it of the things it does wrong, the better it will be at creating appropriate voices to this. Now, I'm not sure I answered your full question.
The other part of it was, sorry, thank you. The other part of it was about kind of misinformation. So we live in a day and age where in some nefarious cases, AI has been used to increase like the levels of misinformation. Think about deepfake technology, et cetera.
Yep.
But is there a way to kind of counteract that by using AI technology to kind of protect against misinformation?
Yes, thank you. There's a couple ways. One is, if I look at something and first of all, it doesn't pass the gut test, I ask for all its citations. And all of the LLMs now will give you the citations. It'll say, hey, here's where I pulled this from. As recently as 2 days ago, I asked it for citations, and all of the citations were false. But I had that gut feeling, right, that this is not pass and muster here. So that's one thing, but you have to be proactively careful about it. The other thing is that they are developing tools to detect this stuff. And back to the having to turn off the plagiarism checker on my class, it's because they are more and more developing these tools where it can detect it. So I think it's the number one thing is back to the human in the mix. It is that we just have to do a gut check, and if it doesn't look right, do the citations and see where it takes you, because often it'll take you to a dead end.
There's a question online about how do we use it for research and not as a substitute for our own voice?
I'm not sure I understand the nuance of the question, but let me try. So with the research piece, I do think that it is very good, again, at synthesizing information that's publicly available. So that's part of the challenge, is that if the information is not publicly available, it's not necessarily going to pull it in. It's the same thing with the prospect research companies that you can use, the softwares you can use. It won't always know everything about someone. And so part of it will be bringing your own knowledge and your own conversations to the table to be augmented by the information you're getting from AI. Because that's the thing that I think is most important to think about with AI right now, is that AI is a tool that is supposed to augment your work, not replace it. So it will be you as the human in the mix taking this as a tool to try to make things better and faster. Let's take it back to a different analogy. The calculator. When the calculator first came out and was starting to replace the slide rule, there were a lot of institutions that said, you can't use a calculator, that's cheating. Now, does everyone use a calculator? Yeah. That's kind of where we're at with AI right now. This is the slide rule moving into the calculator. We don't know what this is capable of yet, but there will always be an operator. The calculator does not solve problems on its own. It solves problems that you have that you enter into it. So I think that starts to get at the question of you as the human need to augment the research, not replace it. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Alice. I think when I was taking your class, we didn't have ChatGPT. Nope. So we're going to wrap up our 4 presenters with Lorenzo Lebrija. He is actually internationally noted as an expert in the innovation field. He is the Chief Innovation Officer here at Virginia Theological Seminary and the Executive Director of the Tri-Tank Institute, which focuses on advancing theological research to meet evolving needs of the church. Lorenzo just spent some time in Seattle, Washington with AI questions around the church, so I'm looking forward to hearing what those two are going to talk about later. So Lorenzo has been president and CEO of Seraphic Fire and Firebird Chamber Orchestra, Miami's professional choir and orchestral ensemble. He was also the Miami program director for the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation. He's had vast media and marketing experience. He has a DMin and a doctorate degree here from Virginia Theological Seminary. He's an alum of the General Theological Seminary for your master's degree in divinity, and here at Virginia Theological Seminary for his doctorate in ministry. And I just bring that up because VTS is in an affiliation agreement with GTS, which is innovative and new. So Lorenzo, bring us home.
All right, here we go. Actually, before I begin, I think it's worth mentioning for the person online who asked a question about research. If you go, there is a thing called consensus.app. So it's consensus.app. And what it does is it does a literature review of all the journals and everything that's out there, and it actually provides you with a list of all the journals and everything else. So it is a great tool for that. Thank you, everyone, for this opportunity today. In particular, I love the fact that I get to bring it home, as Linda said, when we talk a little bit about the wisdom of Henry Nouwen. It is always good that as we do this work and we think about this work, that we think about the spirituality of this work, particularly because of where most of us here do this work. So in this talk, I hope to explore the spirituality of Henry Nouwen and his book, The Spirituality of Fundraising, and offer some reflections that will connect it to our modern day reality, including a little bit of AI. So I'll begin by talking a little bit about Father Nouwen. The bulk of our time will be in two parts. The first part, for those of you who haven't read the book, will recap a little bit of the spirituality of fundraising. And then I will walk through a modern day reimagining of what that means for us in this world, at this time. But before I begin, I want to ask you a question. As fundraisers, potential fundraisers, and others here, what is your own experience when it comes to fundraising? Have you viewed it as a spiritual practice or merely as a financial task, something that needs to get done? So a little bit about me so that you know sort of who I am. I am the Reverend Dr. Lorenzo Lebrija. You can just call me the Reverend Dr. Lebrija. I'm just kidding. Excellent. I'm still just used to Lorenzo. My work can best be described as a practical theologian. I am a trained futurist by the Institute for the Future in Palo Alto, California, which is not just something out of a Marvel comic book. I am an Episcopal priest in the Diocese of San Diego who lives in Los Angeles and whose office is in Virginia. So I spent a lot of time in the air. So if you ever need a prayer and I'm already closer to God, just give it to me and I'll be happy to do that. But a lot of my time is about strategic foresight, where we look at the church of today and we say, how can we innovate ourselves into where the Holy Spirit may be calling us as a church? And to that, as Linda mentioned, I do lead the Tri-Tank Research Institute. This is what we call our path to purpose, how we do our work. We begin with idea, we pilot it, then we yield. We say, is there anything there in this idea? Then if we discover that there is, we go deeper into the research. We do actual research in the field to figure out, then we actually stop. And we say, we can stop here and call it a day unless we find something that's worth missionally for us to go forward. If we do find something, then we do go forward. We design, we experiment. Once again, we stop and say, now what? With this information, what do we do? And then finally, if it's something that's worth for the church, we try to scale it. To this day, about 14 ministries have been birthed from Tri-Tank. Our current areas of focus include young adult families, where we are asking questions no one else is asking and finding data that will help the church in this future where nuns are not going to transmit their faith to the younger generation. And I mean the NONES, not the nuns with the habits, but the people who are religiously unaffiliated. We're also looking at faith formation, where we are showing that congregations that take faith formation seriously show vitality and growth. We're also looking at Latino ministry, where we are about to pilot a program here in the United States that's a whole new approach for the Episcopal Church of lay-planted and lay-led Spanish-speaking communities of faith. And finally, we are dealing in artificial intelligence, where we held the first ever AI and the Church Summit of mainline denominations here in the United States, have released Kathy, which is a chatbot for the Episcopal Church, stands for Churchy Answers That Help You. Kathy. She's an Episcopal chatbot, and we are working on version 3.0, and where we are working on methods to use artificial intelligence to augment relationships in a positive way. Something that Alice did not mention is that unfortunately it turns out that 33% of young adults 13 to 39 would be willing to have a romantic relationship with AI as well. But before all of this work, I was a fundraiser. And Henry Nouwen's approach to fundraiser deeply impacted me. And his work is particularly relevant, I believe, in today's rapidly changing world. To be honest, he had me at the quote where he said, "Fundraising is precisely the opposite of begging." And that to me said, ooh, maybe I can do this. So a little bit about Henry Nouwen. He is best known for his books. He's got dozens and dozens of books. He was an academic at both Yale and Harvard. Then he moved to the large community in Canada, where he did a lot of his writing. He's best known perhaps for Life of the Beloved, which to me as a priest is perhaps one of the most foundational books of spirituality I have ever encountered. Father Nouwen unfortunately died in 1996 at the very young age of 64. What was important about his work, though, is that he emphasized a commitment that integrated spirituality into every aspect of our lives. To him, everything was spiritual, which is why Nouwen's spirituality of fundraising emerged from that belief, from his deep conviction that that fundraising is not simply a financial transaction. It is a spiritual act. He says, fundraising is proclaiming what we believe in such a way that we offer other people an opportunity to participate with us in our vision and our mission. So let's take a little closer look at the spirituality of fundraising. Nouwen's work is more than just an approach to fundraising. It's not a how-to book, if you will. I see it actually as a practical framework which we can use for other aspects of our life, our work, and our ministries. The framework basically boils down to this. Our work is generally to invite others into God's mission for the world. Second, we are continuously being called to conversion if we're paying attention to God's words in our life. Third, how can what we be doing build the community of God? No matter what our work is, how can that work continue to build the community of God? And are we placing ourselves, number 4, are we placing ourselves in God's abundant care through prayer? Because if we are doing it with invitation, conversion, building a community of God, and doing it with prayer, it is a ministry, like any other ministry with a deep spiritual foundation. Now, what he actually did was he reframed asking for money. It went from an invitation for your money to an invitation to join God's work, not as a form of begging. It was, in a way, similar to proclaiming the gospel. But to do that work of inviting other people into this, we have to have a clear vision, and we've heard about that from our previous speakers today. We have to have a very clear vision for our ministry so that we can invite others into this mission. So it really is about offering inspiration, not desperation. Think about entrepreneurs. They show confidence and clarity with their ideas. They thus build trust and excitement from that clarity. We ourselves need to be so clear on God's desires for our world and how we can help bring them about that others will see us with confidence and clarity. Here's an example. I just had an opportunity when I was in Seattle to spend some time with the Reverend Doit Kahn, who hopefully he's watching, but I did not tell him I was going to talk to him about him today. He's a modern church fundraiser to the best that there can be. He was going to do a capital campaign, and he brought in experts, and he said, okay, here's our list, here's what people are giving, how much can we raise? And the experts in the room said, you can raise no more than $4 million. He's like, So let me see if I get this right. I will give you my list. You will tell me that I can raise this. Then you'll actually go out there, make the asks, but I have to go in and close them, and for which I'm going to pay you my percentage. They're like, yes. He's like, you're fired. I'm going to do this. I think our vision is clearer than what you're presenting. And so he went out and he asked 2 questions of people when he was doing this. Who gave you the church? Who was it that gave you the church? Was it your grandmother? Was it your father, your mom? Who gave you the church? And who do you want to give the church to? And his whole case for support was, we will build whatever God has in store for us to build. If we get enough money, we will fix the church. If we get more than that, we will fix the parish hall. If we get more than that, we'll go into the next building. And then if we get more than that, we'll go into the offices. And instead of raising $4 million, they raised $9.2 million, simply by being clear about God's mission in Seattle by asking, who gave you church? He was inviting people into that vision of God for Seattle. In his book, Nouwen sees fundraising as an invitation to participation, not a transactional activity. This is about sharing in God's spiritual mission. The key point, I would say, is the contrast between what's in it for me to what am I being invited into by you. Nouwen says, fundraising is also always a call to conversion. And this call comes to both those who seek the funds and those who have funds. And I think this idea of being transformed by money can really be illustrated by a Bible story. And that's the story of Zacchaeus, which we can find in the Gospel of Luke. You'll remember that Zacchaeus was a wealthy tax collector, and he's described as someone who had accumulated a lot of his wealth by dishonest means. When Jesus visits Jericho, Zacchaeus climbs a tree. He was a short guy, so he climbs this tree to see Jesus. And Jesus sees him on the tree and says, "Hey, Zacchaeus, come on down, for tonight we must stay at your house." This led to a profound change in Zacchaeus' own heart. That invitation to participate in God's mission changed his heart. And as a result of his encounter with Jesus, Zacchaeus says, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. If I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount." This act of radical generosity and restitution symbolizes his own transformation from a person focused on his own wealth to one focused on justice and reconciliation. Jesus even affirms his transformation by saying, "Today, salvation has come to this house." Zacchaeus' willingness to give up his wealth as a sign of repentance and transformation is a powerful example to us of how financial generosity can reflect a deeper inner spiritual change. This is how Father Nouwen puts it. Fundraising from the point of view of the gospel says to people, I will take your money and invest it in this vision only if it is good for your spiritual journey, only if it is good for your spiritual health. What a different approach that is, to not just see someone as dollar signs, but I am here to minister to you, and I do this by inviting you into this. Nouwen's earth-shattering idea is that fundraising really is a call to conversion, not just for the donors, but also for those of us who seek funds. He says, those of us who ask for money need to look carefully at ourselves. We will never be able to ask for money if we do not know how we ourselves relate to money. he finishes by saying, what is the place of money in our lives? So this conversion requires that we change and rethink our own relationship to wealth and resources. So I would ask you, what is your relationship to money? If money makes you uncomfortable, ask yourself, why is that? For now on, the way that you shift from fear and anxiety about asking for funds is by confronting your own reality about money. He says the reason for the taboo about money is that money has something to do with that intimate place in our heart where we need security. And we do not want to reveal our need or give away our security to someone who maybe only accidentally might betray us by saying no. This call also invites the donors to experience the spiritual benefits that come from generosity, suggesting that giving certainly enriches their own spiritual journey. Going on to building our community, Nouwen's way of fundraising focuses on fundraising as a tool for building God's community on earth, not just about acquiring funds. He says those who need money and those who can give money meet on the common ground of God's love. What a beautiful place that is. For sure, relationships are more important than transactions. We all know that. And fundraising is a way to deeper connections in faith communities if we do it based on spirituality. He says fundraising is a very concrete way to help the kingdom of God come about. Asking people for money is giving them the opportunity to put their resources at the disposal of God's kingdom. I mean, think about what we've heard earlier today. Anna asked us how you see society as a perfect world. When you're thinking about that big vision, how do you see society as a perfect world? Because that is God's kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. Rob, when he told us about how Trinity Wall Street looks at their giving, said that it is to improve the well-being of mankind, is how Carnegie saw it from the beginning. 70% of the dollars that go to fundraising come from individual donors who want to be a part of the bigger story of God doing good in the world. The resilient communities that Trinity has funded, where the church and the community are essential. Philanthropy, what a beautiful quote that was, as the love of our fellow man and woman, I would say. And of course, Alice talking about AI and our community. Nouwen, of course, continues and brings it all together for those of us in the spiritual realm. The only way that we can do this, the only way that we can approach something like this is through a deep belief, trusting in God's abundance, rather than approaching fundraising from a place of fear or scarcity. He says, if our security is totally in God, then we are free to ask for money. Only when we are free from money can we freely ask others to give it. Think about that. Only when we are free from money, from being the slave to money, can we freely ask others to give it. This, he says, is the conversion to which fundraising as a ministry calls us. Friends, there is spiritual freedom that comes from trusting that God will provide indeed for what is truly needed. And it bears mentioning here that the mantra, if you will, our underlying foundation of the work we do at Tri-Tank, and this began probably about 3 years into my work, is the theology of God's abundance. And we articulate it this way: God has given us everything we need to do the work we are called to do in the world right now. And if we do not see that abundance, it is generally because it's in a form which we cannot recognize. I want to give you an example. I got a call from a church in North Carolina, and they said, Lorenzo, we need your help. I'm all in. What can I do? So we got on the phone, and they said, we want to reach young people. I'm like, okay, tell me about your context. Tell me about the people around you. I'd love to help you. And they said, well, they're building 1,000 units, 1,500 units right near us. I'm like, that's amazing. That must mean that you have industry nearby. So industry brings young workers, families. They're like, oh, no. These are actually assisted living facilities. And I'm like, why are you trying to reach young people? Because that's the future of the church. But maybe God, I said, placed 1,500 people who are seeking meaning right down the street from you that you can walk to. Yeah, but we want to reach young people. But perhaps the abundance that God is placing in your midst is something that you're not recognizing. We do this more often than we care to admit. We think we should be telling God how God should do God's work. And because we can't see any other way than how we see it, we assume, well, obviously God can't. And God probably just laughs. You may be asking yourself, well, that sounds great, Lorenzo. But how do I get there? How do I get to this place where I can actually believe like that? I want to believe like that, but it's just not me. Well, worry not. Father Nouwen's got us. He says, how do we become people whose security base is God and God alone? How can we stand confidently with the rich and the poor alike on the common ground of God's love? How can we ask for money without pleading and call people to a new community without coercing them? How can we express not only our own way of speaking, but also our own way of being with others? How can we express that joy, the vitality, and the promise of our mission and vision? In short, he says, how do we move from perceiving fundraising as an unpleasant but unavoidable activity to recognizing fundraising as a life-giving, hope-filled expression of ministry? Prayer, he says. Prayer is the spiritual discipline through which our mind and heart are converted from hostility or suspicion to hospitality toward people who have money with gratitude. Gratitude is the sign that this conversion is spreading into all aspects of our life. Don't you just love that? It all boils down to something we can all do. Prayer. No special degrees, no special classes, no symposiums, just prayer. And he even tells us that how we know we'll be on the right track, by gratitude. Because we start to see things, even the no's that we get along the path, with gratitude. Nouwen says all of these things together is what makes a form of ministry, not separate from other spiritual practices, but as a way to engage people in the mission of God. To him, fundraising is as spiritual as, quote, giving a sermon and entering a time of prayer, visiting the sick, or feeding the hungry. Fundraising, he says, is proclaiming what we believe in such a way that we offer people an opportunity to participate with us in our vision and mission. We heard it from Anna. How you see society in a perfect world, that's God's vision. And are we coming at it, as we were told, from a scarcity mindset or an abundance mindset? Dream bigger. Thank you for that invitation. Dream bigger than what we are asking for. I'd like to now enter the second part of this talk, a modern reimagining of Nouwen's vision. And for the record, I admit that taking a classic like the spirituality of fundraising from someone like Henry Nouwen and trying to give it a modern spin is a fool's errand. But here's what I'm going to do. First, I want to apply some of the modernity to his framework, and then by talking about how Nouwen himself and how his thinking today might apply to the world where artificial intelligence reigns. So as a quick recap, the framework is most things can be seen as ministry, because if we are inviting people into God's vision, if we are calling people to conversion, if we are building the community of God, and if we are placing ourselves in God's abundance through prayer, that is a ministry. So let's talk a little bit about fundraising in a modern digital world. We have already established that fundraising is a ministry, but how can we in this modern world, how can we actually help ourselves with some of the other parts of the framework? Well, in the last few years, you probably know this, digital platforms have transformed the way that we can engage with fundraising. In Nouwen's time, fundraising meant face-to-face, always interacting with someone face-to-face, or maybe writing a letter. And if you were lucky, you could type it. Today, it's digital campaigns and crowdfunding. Yet online giving can also be a spiritual act, inviting people into God's vision even from afar. Here's an example, GoFundMe campaigns where we see something on the news and we are moved in our hearts to want to help. That move in our hearts is God's Spirit stirring. So when we're able to participate, we do that. Using platforms like Patreon to support people whose work is important to us is a way of participating in God's kingdom. Or church-specific digital tools like text to give, or being able to automatically give so that even if I happen to not be there on Sunday, I can still participate in funding my congregation. We actually did an experiment at TriTank regarding crowdfunding, and we created videos that people were able to show. And they worked. Storytelling still works. Some of them were able to raise in the hundreds of thousands from their little video. Others were able to raise just enough for what they were seeking. So we know that these tools and using social media are ways of extending the invitation to God's realm. Through modern means, anyone, as you probably know, can be a content creator or an influencer. Nouwen would call them actually inviters. The tools are easy to use, but the impact can now be worldwide. We can invite people near and far into God's vision. In today's world, especially on social media, people can connect best through stories. In fact, they're literally called stories if you go Instagram. Nouwen's principles of vision and mission can be brought to life through basic storytelling. But of course, that's not new. We know storytelling works. It's not just in our case for support. Scripture tells us and reminds us of the importance of storytelling as a means to teach, inspire, and convey deeper truths. Jesus, of course, in his parables, I only need to say Good Samaritan or Prodigal Son, and you all probably think of the stories immediately. I don't even have to say them. Then we know when the prophet Nathan needed to confront King David, he used a story to do it, rather than just coming out and saying, "You are a bad person." He let David come to that conclusion by himself. And of course, Moses saw storytelling as so important that he commanded such an important event as the Passover that it always be reminded and told as a story year after year, so that we will never forget God's intervention. So today, storytelling still matters, perhaps even more. The visions of the kingdom, which we ourselves are trying to bring about, nowadays need to break through a very, very crowded world. And so, video stories, blogs, testimonials, All of these can demonstrate the impact of a community's generosity, creating these deeper connections. We heard about storytelling also from our earlier speakers. You know, when you're asked, everything from askafundraiser.com that can help you build your own case for support, which is really telling the story of what you're hoping to do, to when Rob told us that they don't call them asylum seekers or immigrants, but newly arrived New Yorkers. That right there tells you a story, even if it's short. Alice talking to us about the frontier. Anna, when she told us that it's all about the work of the aspirational vision. And we all laughed a little when she mentioned college athletics because we know a little bit about that. Stories matter. Of course, our conversion needs to go beyond money. Modern generosity isn't limited to finances. People can also give of their time, talents, and especially, as we heard, their networks. How can we, says Nouwen, embrace a vision of generosity that goes beyond finances, where people are invited to give of themselves in ways that extend their own skills and talents to God's work? I mean, think about it. We have a church plant in the Episcopal Church in Indianapolis whose website literally is churchthatserves.org. It is not St. Swithin's in the Swamp, episcopalchurch.com or .org. It is churchthatserves.org. And that's for their actual name is Good Shepherd Episcopal Church. And our own research at Tri-Tank Research Institute shows that for Generation Z, this is perhaps one of the most important ways that we can use to get to them, to show them that the church is authentic in its call to do the work. For anyone who's been involved in Latino ministries, we know that it isn't about the money that they're going to give on Sunday mornings, but rather their skills and how happy they are to participate in literally building God's kingdom by building God's church. Because they will come and they will fix and they will paint and they will add air conditioning units and they will help with the garden, all of that. These are also just as valid ways and spiritual tools. That's what Henry Nouwen is saying to us. And of course, we know that there can be online communities that are vibrant and flourishing. Central Synagogue in New York City is a Reformed synagogue. They have 3,000 members, and so they are at capacity. They can take, we only wish we had that problem, right? They can take no more members. And so they have a waiting list of 900 people to join their synagogue. And so what they did is they built an online community where they themselves, they call it the neighborhood, where they themselves can share stories. And every day, about 25% of the community goes online to be with other people online from their own community, even if they're not in central New York, in Central Synagogue in New York City. So we know that this is important. We know that online communities can work. And of course, one hopes that all of this is still deeply rooted in our own prayer. And if it's not, if you're watching right now, if you are here right now and you're listening to me, and perhaps you're like, oops, I haven't really done the prayer part. Well, see this as an invitation to reground yourselves in God's abundant care. As we think about Nouwen's work in the modern world and in our modern context today, I believe that there is another realm, like fundraising, that from the outside appears secular and utilitarian, but holds deep spiritual potential, and that is artificial intelligence. Since the release of ChatGPT at the end of 2022, it is not an exaggeration to say that our world will be significantly changed because of AI. The impact of artificial intelligence could easily be seen as when people look back, and I'm hoping that they will, when they look back hundreds of years from now, when they look at our time, that they will see it very much similar to the mid-18th century when we began the transition from hand production to machine production and the increased use of steam power. Yes, that was the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Of course, there is no doubt that AI will continue. We cannot stop it. This genie is out of the bottle. But this will also, as we saw, impact fundraising. It is in that spirit now that I'd like to now put myself in the shoes of Father Nouwen and talk about how we might want to approach AI. So let us apply the Nouwen framework, that's what I'm calling it now, the Nouwen framework to AI, or perhaps in more keeping with the Nouwen theme of how we might approach AI, the spirituality of artificial intelligence. Again, we're looking at it ministry, invitation, conversion, community, and prayer. AI as an invitation. Fundraising, in Nouwen's eyes, invited people to contribute to something greater than themselves. AI has the capacity to help us invite, whether it is through personalized learning, more inclusive church experiences, or connecting with people who have been isolated from our communities. The first time that we at TriTank did church in the metaverse, people said, why would you ever do that? Until we got the letters from people who are paralyzed who said, thank you for creating a space where I can go to church in the metaverse that is Episcopalian. AI is a call to conversion. You will recall that Nouwen's earth-shattering idea was that fundraising was indeed a call to conversion, not just of the donors, but also of those seeking the funds. I believe that artificial intelligence offers us a similar call to conversion. AI, my friends, is not just a tool. It is an invitation for us, both as individuals and as a church, to transform the way we engage with technology, serve others, and embody our mission in the world. This conversion challenges us to use AI that deepen our commitment to love, justice, and community, much like Nouwen's vision for fundraising did. So what does this look like, Lorenzo? AI as a call to personal conversion. AI, like fundraising, invites us to rethink how we approach technology in ministry. It is not just about using a tool. It is about recognizing the potential for artificial intelligence to transform the way we live out our faith. This could be a personal conversion for those who are resistant to technology. You might know who you are. Calling them to embrace artificial intelligence in ways that align with Christian ethics and service and love. AI as a call to community conversion. AI challenges the broader church community to reconsider how ministry is done. It offers an opportunity to reimagine community engagement, worship, and discipleship in ways that are more accessible and inclusive. Part of the reason, going to the earlier question, why AI is already inherently biased is because it is being built primarily by white men. And so that bias is built in. All the knowledge that we're putting in comes from libraries that include more books from, you guessed it, white men. So what do you end up with as a tool that already has a built-in bias towards white men? But here's an opportunity for us to now, at the onset of this, to say we need different voices, and we need those voices because there are fewer of them to weigh more, so that they are heard when AI goes into search. What are the answers that are out there? Well, I'm not just going to look at white men's answers, but I'm going to look at others, those that have more weight now. That's what we did when we built Kathy. Kathy's built on ChatGPT, but we built, think of it as a bookcase on top of ChatGPT that says, no matter what you find in ChatGPT, this is your primary source. And if you ever find anything that goes against your primary source is your primary source. This takes precedent. So if you were to ask, am I a sinner because I am gay? Kathy might look at the rest of ChatGPT, and the answer that she would come up with without knowing who you are or without being Kathy would be a nuanced answer that says something related to, hey, I just want you to know that different churches see it differently. No. Kathy's answer will be an Episcopal answer that will say, you are absolutely made in God's image and you are not a sin and you are beloved by God, because that's what the Episcopal Church believes. So this conversion that we're doing for our communities, here is about our church moving from traditional modes of operation to innovative, tech-integrated practices that meet the needs of today's world. Finally, in this conversion part, AI as a call to ethical conversion. Just as Nouwen called both fundraisers and donors to approach resources with integrity and spirituality, AI calls us to a conversion of our own conscience. As we develop these tools for ministry that utilize AI, we must commit to ethical practices that prioritize human dignity, inclusivity, and justice. This conversion calls us to confront issues like the bias in AI, misuse of data, and unequal access. Bringing it all together, do not worry, Linda. I see the timer. AI as a community builder. Nouwen taught us that fundraising could be a partnership. Similarly, AI can be a collaborator in our ministry by helping us build God's community. It can help us extend the reach of our work, communicate across boundaries, as we mentioned earlier, language boundaries, and offer new opportunities for connection in ways that we'd never imagined before. Just as Nouwen saw fundraising as a creative space for others to participate in God's work, AI opens the doors for new involvement. In the same way, we must approach AI with the mindset of ethical stewardship, ensuring it is used for the common good, in line with the church's mission of love and to serve. And of course, AI as a tool for prayer. A few years ago, we did a movie, a tri-tech movie that said some possible scenarios of the future. In it, we talked about authentic, do-it-yourself spirituality, which is what we're seeing in young people. Ask Kathy is made to specifically give young people access to spiritual tools from the Episcopal Church that they otherwise would never find their way towards, simply by being there. And it can be accessed at 2 a.m. The question perhaps that is at a higher level than where I'm at is, can God be found in a chatbot conversation? We can talk about that over wine later. So you see that we can take Nouwen's groundbreaking concept that fundraising is a form of ministry and expand it to a new age. AI need not separate us from other spiritual practices, and when we use it to engage people, we're actually using AI for the mission of God. So remember, invitation, conversion, community, and we do it all grounded in prayer. So I would say that I believe makes AI a worthy tool for ministry. I'd like to finish with a reflection from Nouwen on prayer and gratitude, which draws on Nouwen's belief that these are the foundations of all spiritual practices, including fundraising and AI as a tool. And this is his quote. In prayer, we seek God's voice and allow God's word to penetrate our fear and resistance so that we can begin to hear God and what God wants us to know. And what God wants us to know is that before we think or accomplish anything, before we have much money or little money, the deepest truth of our human dignity, our human identity, our humanity is this: You are my beloved son. You are my beloved daughter. With you, I am well pleased. Gratitude flows from the recognition that who you are and what we have are gifts to be received and shared. And all that I can add to that is amen. Thank you. Thank you. With 40 seconds left. Any questions in those 40 seconds? Yeah. Hold on for the microphone to get to you, please, so that we can make sure that those online can hear it as well.
An ethical question.
Yes.
That when we receive money, and perhaps AI helps us on this, should we ask where the money came from? In other words, how the money was made, and who gave it, and what was their motivation in giving it?
That's an excellent question, which I think is up to the individual's conscience and where perhaps the churches or the nonprofit is. Because here's why I would say that. The different contexts are sometimes put us in such a place where we think that taking anyone's money that we can do good with it. But I also stand here as a participant in the church pension fund, which has participated and invests in oil and other parts that I am not the most proud of. So I can't stand here and pretend to say that we should definitely walk away as someone who will benefit from that. So I really believe that it's our own conscience that must come into play there.
That groups such as the Quakers, when they accept money, they are very clear as to where that money came from and how it was generated. In other words, they do put an ethical screen on it. That's my understanding.
Yeah. You know, another way of looking at that question would be, I can understand that this money, I may not know exactly where it came from, and it may have come from, we are beneficiaries at this seminary, right? Of this seminary being built by slaves. So that we can say, I understand that, but I can also, if I turn around and I'm going to feed God's people with this money, again, this is where our own conscience needs to come in. And I'm not an ethicist. I'm a practical theologian, so I'm not going to stand here and tell people how they should believe. But if that is where the Quakers are, that's a wonderful place. And we all need to arrive at those, as we were talking earlier, those policies that stand with who we are as Christians in the world. Mm-hmm. Thank you for your question. Other questions? Online, go for it.
First, I want to just share lots of appreciation and gratitude to all the speakers, lots of enthusiasm for all the topics, and I just wanted to convey that to everybody. And two specific questions. First, how does the church reconcile itself to the financial ethics of how AI corporations profit from gleaning data from the internet?
You know, that is, again, that's a deeper question. I don't yet know. There are so many ethical questions, but here's what I do believe. I don't know the answer to the question specifically, and I can tell you that I use it, so I may be guilty of it. However, I do believe that the church needs to have a place at the table as these conversations are taking place, so that we can remind the large corporations, beyond just the privacy and the fact that only corporations that can invest $100 billion a year into AI will be able to use it. What does that mean for the rest of the world that don't have these, right? So if we don't have, my fear would be that if we say we're not going to participate in this, then as with many other parts of capitalism, it is the oligarchs who will be making those decisions solely, and that we will have no place in that conversation. I think our call is to, what was the group that asked the right questions? It was Father Benanti. He was our keynote speaker at the the church summer. Paolo Benanti is the Pope's advisor on AI, and he says our job as the church is not to have all the answers, but to make sure that we're asking all the questions of the right people. So we need to make sure that we are asking these questions of the leaders of the Googles and Facebooks and others. Was there a second question? And I'll finish with that one.
A second question. Why do you think seminarians, priests, clergy, and others are so uncomfortable fundraising and asking for money?
I believe, I do, and as a former chief fundraiser for the Diocese of Los Angeles, I believe that a lot of it is because we come from a place of begging. Not as what Nowen was telling us, which is it's an invitation. The moment we can do that shift in our own minds that what we are doing is inviting people into God's mission, and actually I should be talking to the person over here who's online, the moment that we can shift our minds, and it takes some practice, as we heard earlier, the same way that you can get better at hearing no from people, you'll also get better at just inviting people and being secure that God will provide and that you're just inviting people into this work. So I encourage you to keep doing that because our work is needed in this world. So thank you for that question. Thank you. Before I go, though, there are two things I need to say. One is, Dwayne, if we can go ahead and bring up, there is two things that I want to mention. This first one, if all of you here and all of you online, make sure that you take a quick little QR code of this and do a quick evaluation of today's symposium, because we don't need to evaluate Dean Markham, who's going to speak next, for a little bit. He would skew all the evaluations to be so high that we want to get your honest opinion of just the rest of us who presented. So if you can take a moment to do the evaluation, just use the QR code for this. For those of you who will get this as a recording to view later, please make sure that you also in your email see the link so that you can evaluate the work that you are seeing. The other QR code that we're going to bring up, which is the blue one, is for our next event, and you can register for it today. I will be holding space on October 22nd at 4 p.m. Eastern, if I recall the exact time. I will be somewhere. I don't know exactly where I am that day. But it is the follow-up where we will hold this space, and we want to talk to you about, at Lifelong Learning, about where we want to take this together, how we can build out things for us so that we can do this work of teaching the church how to fundraise better and do that work. So thank you very much. That's my time. And I will invite our Dean and President, the very Reverend Dean Ian Markham.
Okay, it's been a long day, but that's been a superb feast. Let's just recognize all four of our speakers. That was really quite exceptional. You know, there's a huge gift in this moment. And the gift is that something that on so many ways is challenging, disquieting, makes one nervous, anxious, and to have 4 presentations that simply lay out ways in which we can participate and do this work is an extraordinary gift that you brought us. So thank you very much indeed. I'm just going to say a few words about the person who suggested we put this together. And I'm going to ask Lorenzo, please, to go to that table. In fact, I should just ask Kevin to bring it, but don't worry, we will do it that way round. Lorenzo can run. This is good. Thank you very much. Yeah, sure. So it's interesting, isn't it? Virginia Theological Seminary is 201 years old. And insofar as we can ascertain, this is the first time. We've dedicated an afternoon to the theme of philanthropy. It pops up occasionally in classes. We have a class for some of the students, money ministry, money management ministry. Used to be a space where it used to pop up, and I know that my colleague, parish administration, touches on these themes. But it's relatively localized. I've held a couple of deanery evenings looking at fundraising where I've invited rectors who do that work, and typically there are 10, 15 students present, and that's great. But this is the first concentrated moment, and it's an important moment because this is a changing world. I mean, what was extraordinary about what you heard is not simply the theological perspective, which is vitally important to feed upon, because if we don't do this out of a praise player, if you don't do this out of a sense you're inviting other people to participate in the mission of God, then, you know, that denies who we are and what we're seeking to be in the world. All the way through to the challenges of AI and how AI can create space for the busy clergy person and leader to do this work. It's an extraordinary range of pictures located in history, grounded in planning and mission, presented to us. And it's no coincidence, I think, that this first symposium was the brainchild of our Vice President for Institutional Advancement, Linda Dienno. So what I did before this occasion is I reached out to the authors and said, there's an understanding that you'll be willing to have your proceedings of the symposium put into a book, and they've all agreed to that. Would you be fine with me turning it into a Festschrift? Now, Festschrift, that's just a little bit about the German word, Festschrift. I have two. A Festschrift, for those who don't know how to spell it, I don't have to look myself, Festschrift, a Festschrift, is typically a classic way an educational institution honors a distinguished professor. What happens is so this is Daniel Migliore's. It's entitled Theology as Conversation. You open it up, and there's a lovely picture of Daniel Migliore. And then you'll find a star-studied array of distinguished scholars from around the world, including our very own, hang on, is she in here? Including, yes, she is, Kate Sonnerigger, David Ferguson. I mean, you know, this is an outstanding array of scholars who all pick up on a theme that's central to Migliore's work and explores it as an essay that's a contribution to the continuing thought of the discipline. Virginia Theological Seminary, interestingly, lasted a Festschrift for John Booty. John Booty was here and professor of church history, left in 1967, went on to become dean of Sewanee, and that came out as The Sacred Story, Anglican Reflections for John Booty, back in 1991. I'm pleased to announce that in recognition of Vice President Linda Dienno's service, the proceedings will be a Festschrift in honor of her work at Virginia Theological Seminary. Please come forward, Linda. Now, of course, you know, a Festschrift will take some time to appear because we've got to put our essays together and get them published. So we're hopeful it'll be available by December. But you can't be the organizer of an occasion like this without an appropriate piece of recognition. You probably recognize these boxes. But anyway, this is a gift from us to you for everything you did to organize this occasion. And thank you very much for having this idea and creating this opportunity for the church to think seriously about the challenge and delight and privilege of raising resources for the mission of God. So thank you very much, Linda.
Don't let me try this.
You say a few words.
Yes. I'm very rarely speechless. This is a huge honor, and you may have discerned that I'm retiring at the end of this year. And Ian was the one who said to me, well, when I told him about my retirement last December, you know, what do you want to do? And we landed on this idea of a symposium. And as I said earlier, it took me a nanosecond to name my dream team. Thank you so much for being here today. I could not have orchestrated a more fundamental, helpful, entertaining, amazing set of conversations than what you all did today. Thank you. And to Gant Redmond, who we've had those conversations, we have cried together, we have laughed together. Thank you for providing the gift that allowed this to happen today. 2 more thank yous, and then I have nothing else to say, which is that really true? No. My husband, who's over there holding up an iPhone, he drove down from Pennsylvania this morning. I didn't know, I didn't think he was going to do that. I thought he was going to be online. So Jeff is the one who has been the true supporter in everything that I've done. He's even built a $90,000 Lego model, which he talked to me about later. So thank you. And finally, and I think most importantly, to the most amazing visionary leader that I've ever had the privilege of knowing in my life, it's Ian Markham. And he came here in 2007, and now here we are, 2024. Go back and read his commentaries to see I'd love to put that in ChatGPT. All your commentaries, I think we should do that. But the visionary things that have happened, and have we raised money? Oh, have we raised money. Ian has raised, I think all totaled maybe $100 million in his time that he's been here. He knows the conversations. He's not afraid to ask. And he's also not afraid to let us go and do our work. And I really, really appreciate that. I've loved every minute of being here. I've loved every minute of this afternoon. And I say thank you.
So there is a reception immediately outside those doors. I'm just going to conclude with just one simple thought. And that is, what I pray and hope will be the result of this afternoon will be each and every one of you online and in this room will take elements of it and actually realize it in your different ministry settings and use and start building up the skill set so we can support the church and we can invite others to participate in God's mission in this world of ours. Please stand for a concluding blessing. The Lord be with you. Loving God, we pause and we give thanks for the gift of today. We give thanks for the journey we've made together. And we give thanks for the ministry and work of Vice President Linda Dienno. And we remember now Fran Redmond and her life. Loving God, we give thanks for the food and fellowship we will enjoy. We remember on this day all those who are hungry, and we pray that they might have food, and that those of us who have food might be hungry for justice. And now may the blessing of God Almighty, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit be upon you and all whom you love this day and forevermore. Amen. Thank you, everybody.